Nobody makes things anymore. That's what we hear. Nobody works with their hands in this developed world country of ours, we hear. Nobody does manual labour. We've offshored all that. Certainly the people thronging to this year's Learning Technologies Conference in London's Docklands aren't the sort of people who work with their hands. They're knowledge workers. But now these people too face being displaced, offshored, and pushed aside by a new post-industrial revolution, AI. And the shockwaves were rippling through L&D at this year's event.
Welcome to The Learning Hack, a podcast about the people and technologies that are creating the future of learning. I'm John Helmer.
Now guess what?
Learning is cool. Learning is cool. Learning is cool. I'm learning.
Learning is fun.
Knowledge is power. Knowledge. Education.
The Learning Hack podcast is sponsored by the Learning Technologies Awards 2025.
When they announced the gold winner, we were, it's us. Wow.
It was really a very, very special moment.
It meant so much to win this award. It was a really proud moment for all of us.
The Learning Technologies Awards brings together the best in global learning technologies. It's a highly prestigious recognition of achievement and innovation.
Quality is very, very important, and learning technologies have got such an amazing reputation for quality.
They're really rigorous. They're not sort of just handed out. You really have to demonstrate that this course has made an impact.
Winning can change lives, build careers, and turbo boost learning in your organisation.
Winning the award has brought a lot of recognition to our team, and it's really validated a lot of things that we're doing for the group. It is such lovely validation.
Basically, this confirmation that we're on the right track, that it makes impact, and that we're able to expand.
Apply today at learningtechnologiesawards.co.uk. The Learning Hack podcast and Great Minds on Learning are supported by Talent Desk. As a freelancer, I sometimes have difficulty getting paid, and it isn't my client's fault. They're tied up in paperwork with a load of other freelancers, vendors, and their contractors to service. I often wish for their sake, as well as mine, there was some genius system to streamline the process and make things easier for everyone. Well, there is. Talent Desk gives you one centralized place to onboard, manage, and pay all your freelancers and vendors seamlessly and compliantly. No chasing, no chaos, just clarity. Visit talentdesk.io/greatminds and get 1 month free. Plus, more time for coffee. Cynical people I know will tell you it isn't necessary to sign up for a big learning conference like this one every year. Come along in 12 months' time, they imply, and you'll find people still saying pretty much the same thing. But I'm glad I didn't listen to those voices, because this is an industry in the grip of major upheaval at the moment, and there's a lot to talk about. Organisations are facing tumultuous, multifactorial change, technology disruption from the explosion of generative AI, funding cuts, a climate of financial uncertainty, geopolitical realignment, assaults on DEI, and societal and legal norms. I could go on. Some of these topics were too hot to address directly in the interviews I did at this year's event. Understandably, in an industry forum such as this, people generally don't much like to talk about politics. There was a certain amount of subtext in some of the interviews. There was an elephant, basically, in every room, and I found it fascinating to hear how some of the brightest people in learning are understanding and facing up to this widespread disruption, starting with one of the leading analysts in the space, a man I've been eager to sit down with for some time.
Hack facts.
Josh Bersin is a global industry analyst and founder of the Josh Bersin Company, providing research and advisory services in HR talent and learning. He also established the Josh Bersin Academy, a professional development platform for HR professionals worldwide. With Josh, I discussed how AI is radically reshaping learning and development from content delivery to job roles. He argues that this technological shift represents the biggest transformation the field has seen in decades, and I agree with him. I caught up with him before he took the stage to deliver his keynote, and began by asking him what he was going to share with the conference.
So the big story I'm going to talk about is what I'm calling the revolution of L&D around AI. And it's not just AI making L&D faster, more productive, a little bit better. It's going to redefine L&D completely. And this is something that, I've seen coming slowly, and it reminds me a lot of my very beginnings in this career when e-learning was new.
Yeah.
And how it transformed the whole idea of training and education. I think we're going to see an even bigger transformation in the way content is used and distributed and absorbed. And it's going to change the jobs and the roles and the structure of L&D in a massive way. And so I'm just going to start introducing what we've been discovering about that.
Yep. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Sure, everyone else is as well. And by the time this comes out, probably in 2 weeks' time,
it'll be out there.
Everyone will know about it.
Yeah.
Now, you're talking about change there. We talk a lot about change in L&D and HR. I went to a forum for CLAs recently, and it was all change and kind of global heads of talent and who are people and so on. First day was entirely talks about change. And yet you feel there's a sort of underlying complacency perhaps. And now we're in a time where we really are at a time of tumultuous change. I've heard it from so many conference platforms year after year. People say things are changing faster now than ever before. And you think, well, maybe not. Mobile learning took about 10 years to get going after we first started talking about it. But at this moment, as we're speaking, as you know, huge changes. The tariffs, realignment in geopolitics, all of this has kind of effects for HR and so on, the people, industries that you talked about. Is it real this time? And more importantly, how are people going to deal with this and all the localized impacts?
Well, let me talk about what it is first, and then we can talk about how people are going to deal with it. So the reason that I think this is a very, very big disruptive change to L&D in particular, HR groups have been going through change too with skills and other technologies. The whole fundamental paradigm of L&D, and I've been involved in this for almost 30 years, is essentially the educational pedagogical idea that we're going to teach someone how to do something with some methodology of instructional design and instructional education. It's going to be a classroom or virtual classroom, an e-learning course, a video, a podcast, a simulation, a VR, whatever it may be. And there's a whole bunch of technologies around that teaching approach. Mm-hmm. And I wrote a book on learning measurement a long time ago. And then, of course, what happens is you, the teacher, the instructor, the L&D person, now have to figure out if they actually learned anything. And so you try to measure whether you had any impact. Mm. But actually, that paradigm is about to get completely broken, because that is a sort of a dated idea that we want to teach people things at work. We don't really want to teach people things. We want to improve their performance and their productivity and their output and their quality of work. Whether we have to, you can call it teaching, you can call it enabling, you can call it supporting, you can call it all sorts of things. So the teaching part of it is a means to an end. It is not the end. And so when you look at L&D defining itself as learning and development, it's defined itself as a teaching and learning function. Well, once you get AI, you can think about it very, very differently. And so the whole disruption, the reason I call it a revolution, is I'm not sure we're going to call it L&D for that much longer, maybe a few more years, but I think it's going to have a new name. Because the paradigm that we've had for the last 30 years that I've been in it is the educational material or the educational content is, can be very, very well designed and carefully crafted and have all sorts of science and stuff behind it. But the platform that it runs in is an LMS. And so we build these really rich instructional experiences, and some of them are face-to-face and some of them are other formats. And then we stick them in a platform and we track them. and the platform doesn't know that much about the content. So we have to keep fixing and improving and translating and curating and editing the content continuously. And that's the business of L&D, is building courses, updating courses, delivering things. And then, next quarter we do it a little bit differently. So let's update all this material. And that kind of cycle is about to get completely broken by AI, because what the AI systems can do is you can take any form of content, whether it be a book, a document, a PowerPoint slide, an audio, a podcast, a speech by the CEO, a lecture by the head of compliance, and you can stick it into the AI platform, and the AI platform will dynamically create instructional material in the form that the individual wants. And the individual is going to have their own LLM, so they're going to ask the system to give them the information in the form they want it. So we're not going to have to figure out how to format it for them. This is a completely different paradigm of education and training and support than we've had before. And the reason I'm so passionate about it right now is because we're doing it in our company. And I've seen what it can do. It's clear to me that since maybe the beginning of e-learning, this is the biggest technology-based education transformation we're going to have seen in a long, long time. At least, I remember when CD-ROMs came out. Well, you and I are the same age, but that stuff seemed pretty cool, in the 1980s. This is so different. And so the question that's been going through my mind, and we're going to talk about at the conference, is what is going to happen to the L&D function? What is going to happen to the L&D team? Is there going to be a corporate training department at all anymore, or is everybody going to do it, in the line of work? How are we going to manage this corpus of content? What's the relationship between what we do in L&D and the rest of the AI projects going on in the company? These are all the kind of exciting new things that are going to Whereas, when I think about the L&D departments and that I worked with for the last 20 or 25 years, they've kind of been stuck in the same mode.
Yeah.
Running the LMS, building more courses, buying these content libraries from vendors.
You call it a publishing model.
Yeah, and it's worked out okay. And there's all sorts of, interesting ways of making it more relevant and for example, user-authored content's really popular now. That wasn't at all popular in the old days, So there's lots of things that have been added, but those to me have been incremental. This is a giant break from the past where everything can be done differently.
Well, people actually change though, because there have been assaults on that publisher model for a long time, going back to...
Here's the reason I think it's going to happen.
And,
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there was an also... I mean, listen, there's always good ideas. The L&D space is filled with really incredibly innovative, creative, scientific, important, innovative people. But the reason that I think this one is going to be hitting L&D sort of like a freight train is the CEOs, and we know this because we talked to a lot of CEOs and CHROs. The CEOs and the CHROs have basically woken up in 2025, and they have decided we are going to use AI, and we are going to shrink the size of the company. We're going to become more productive. IT budgets are up 62% this year to buy AI. Nothing else in the company is being funded like this.
Yeah.
And so the expectations are very, very high. And so L&D departments that aren't thinking about this and jumping into this new way of thinking about content and distribution of content and support are going to get clobbered by the AI group that's going to do it on their own without you.
Yeah.
Or a sales enablement group's just going to use AI and do their own training without going to L&D anymore if L&D doesn't catch up. Yeah. So I think it's not just that the technology is great and it really, it's a little bit better for learners and all that. There's this massive interest in AI, and some of it's coming from the vendors, trying to convince companies that if they're not, Microsoft's doing a very good job of convincing companies that if you're not using the Copilot, you're going to fall behind.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be really fun. I think it's going to be exciting for L&D. I think there's going to be a lot of concern, like, well, what do I do if I'm an instructional designer? Do I trust this AI thing to do my job? But I'm a writer. We all go through this.
Yeah. I'll tell you about my page.
Yeah.
how about the super worker? If we focus on the impact on the workforce of all this for a second, because it sounds kind of worrying that it's going to be an opportunity to reduce headcount as far as a lot of
it is. I mean, but
that may have good effects in that it prompts AI to actually get on do something, because if it's just going to be about sacking people, we've still got the same tools. That's not going to work. We're going to have to do something to get on board this. On the other hand, it sounds like rather sad days if people are really getting laid off like this. Could you talk about this?
Yeah, I don't see it that way at all.
What this?
Sure.
What
yeah, let me
person is.
Yeah, so we wrote this big paper on the super worker late last year. So the way we see it, and we do talk to a lot of companies and a lot of vendors, this is a technology that's more powerful in some respects, certainly more powerful relative to data and information than anything we've ever seen. So just like, mechanical machines replaced a lot of blue-collar work, this is the equivalent of the machines that are going to replace white-collar work. So if you're a writer, a graphic designer, an instructional designer, an editor, the AI can do a lot of your work better or maybe faster than you can. You could argue if it's better, but it's pretty good at a lot of those things.
And it's
in intake, I don't know the word I'm trying to find, a lot of information faster than we can.
Yeah.
Like in the case of our research, in order for us to do a really comprehensive study, we're going to have to interview 30 or 40 people. We're going to have to do a survey. It's going to take months and months and months. If those interviews are recorded, I can put the recorded interviews into Galileo, which is our AI, and I can ask Galileo to summarize what the last 20 people just said for the last 20 hours of interviews, and it'll do that for me. Now, it doesn't write the report, but it does a pretty good job of assimilating information. So you apply that to sales, customer service, finance, marketing, HR, learning and development, supply chain, all these things that go inside of companies. All these, routine kind of dull white-collar jobs are going to get filtered away more and more and more. But that doesn't mean there aren't going to be jobs, because just because you can maybe automate a lot of these routine jobs, so can everybody else. So the bar gets raised. So now the question is, how do you as a company use these new systems to add value in ways that are unique to the business that you're in or the company that you're in relative to somebody else? So the way Nike uses AI to sell and maybe custom manufacture shoes probably isn't going to be the same way that Puma does it or another company, because they have different supply chains, different shoes, different customers. So there's going to be all sorts of new jobs created for value add on top of the AI. Sometimes people call it managing the AI. Sometimes people sort of personify the AI, training the AI, evolving it to be better and better and better. So, I don't think the unemployment rate's going to go up. I think we're still going to have a low unemployment rate, but there'll be a bunch of new jobs created around these platforms because the company will scale more.
Yeah.
And so the whole idea of AI, and this is what CEOs are hoping for, is that it's not that we replace a whole bunch of people, but maybe we can do twice as much revenue with the people we have, or 30% more, and take the people that are in dull, maybe uninteresting jobs and move them into more interesting roles. And that's the idea of the super worker, is that if a company does this well, the jobs in the company should be better and higher paying because the output is higher.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of, bring in the machines and get rid of all the people, the machines do everything. In white-collar work, most of the work is not routine. I mean, when I go to a bank and I want to, conduct some kind of a transaction, some of it's very routine, but I'm a little bit different. My, needs are a little bit different, so that the bank wants to give me some kind of customized service. So there's still a huge amount of configuration and training and optimization of these things that has to happen, and people are going to have to do that.
Yeah.
And then monitor them. Like, in other words, going back to, our example again. So we built Galileo, which is our AI. We put all of our content into it over the last year or two. And it basically is as good as talking to me if you ask it questions. Maybe as good, maybe better, depending on how you like me. But sometimes it gets the question wrong. Sometimes it can't find something. So we've got to watch what it's doing and manage our corpus of information to keep it high quality. And then as the market changes, we need to put more information in it. So we took our research group, which goes out and calls people and does surveys, and we put them in with the product group because because the way people are going to consume the information we create more and more and more will be through this AI. Yeah. So if you're in the publishing business, your business is going to change, learning and development, sales, marketing, all that. So, my experience with the super worker is that there's going to be plenty of jobs.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what happened last time round.
Right. It didn't.
We're sort of hoping.
Look over. Yeah. You just go back in time.
I mean, another thing that happened last time round is that things didn't change and happen as quickly as we wanted to in some areas. It kind of jerked, and there was a last mile problem, and potentially there is that with agentic.
Well, that'll happen here too. There'll be, the only reason we're doing all this is we've talked to a lot of companies, so we've found the pioneers. I mean, one of the companies I interviewed a couple of weeks ago is a pharmaceutical company with about 6,000 employees. They downsourced their L&D department to 10 people. And they're using chat. They're creating custom GPTs and using AI tools for all of their training, and they have a compliance operation they put into AI too. So they don't have an LMS anymore. I think they run Workday for HR. So there are some forward-thinking companies that are kind of going this way pretty far. Not very many yet, but I can see it coming.
And can you give any examples of super workers that you have seen where the roles are completely changing within?
Yeah, I mean, just going back to these guys I just talked to, the guy who runs, I don't think he's the CLO. I think he's the head of training ops or something. He worked with the AI group in their company, which is kind of an IT group, and they taught him how to build custom GPTs, which is a customized agent. And he's not a software engineer, he's an L&D person. And he said, well, once they taught me how to do that, I built a GPT that does course scheduling. I built a GPT for all employees that tells them when they're out of compliance and what compliance they need to take. I built a GPT to manage the loading and versioning of all of our courses in the platform they have for an LMS. I mean, I think that's kind of what a super worker does. They learn how to use these new tools, and they do their job 10 times faster or better because they can use the tools. So that's an example.
Interesting. We all need to be super workers. Can we talk a little bit about what this is going to do to the vendor market? I'm conscious here, there's a little window in the corner of this room that you can't see, and there are all these stands for the Learn Tech companies, many of whom I would have worked for under different names at various points. And you'll have consulted with, I'm sure, and I've consulted with a lot of those as well for marketing and so on. You make a distinction between AI native vendors and AI as a bolt-on, and you say that the two, obviously some LMS functions where people still need that. They need the transactional side of it, but basically AI isn't something you can just bolt onto an existing system. Doesn't that mean that there's going to be a massive disruption?
Yeah, there is,
and there'll be some names disappearing from that floor.
Well, I mean, the old stuff doesn't go away quickly. Companies that have spent tens of millions of dollars in their LMS and their content, they're not going to throw it away. So the new dynamic content systems will eat away at the libraries of content over time.
Yeah.
I mean, in some companies, it might take many, many years. Like if you're an oil company like Shell Oil, I mean, they have so much training on production and manufacturing. They're not going to throw that away unless something way, way better comes along. So there'll be a period of time where the old systems will sort of decline slowly, and then all of a sudden they'll start getting shut off. But the new vendors are going to be, they already are disruptive. And so you could sort of take the vendor market and it's complex, but you could sort of break it into two types. Incumbent vendors that have reasonably good sized customer bases who start applying AI to make their current offerings better. So LinkedIn, for example, LinkedIn Learning is a little bit of an old paradigm system. It's videos. It's 1 hour long videos. Well, they've added an AI on top of it, so you can search through the videos and find content automatically. So they haven't regenerated all the content, but it's pretty good. It helps.
Yeah,
you could argue maybe it's not.
Iteration was absolute disaster. I couldn't find anything.
Well, that's my point, is that, those companies are going to use AI to burnish up the thing they have now and make it nicer and easier to use. Then there's new vendors that are starting from scratch that are building something that in some cases is so spectacular you can't believe it.
Yeah.
But it actually works. And I think those guys are going to find, they can't replace all the customers who have a lot of this old stuff, but they're going to find pioneering customers that want to start over, and then they're going to niche away at it. So, yeah, I think, look at what happened to the LMS market. How many companies got bought by Cornerstone because they couldn't stay alive?
That I worked for.
Yeah, right. I mean, all of that. The LMS, you remember the LMS market was very innovative in 1999 and 2000 and 2001. So this is very similar to that.
Yeah. Your analysis of how centralized L&D has fared within the organization in the last couple of decades, I thought was very interesting. You've seen CLOs being downgraded from their first introduction as a business function, and a centrifugal force put in more and more.
Oh, you're listening to my stuff, aren't you?
Yeah, I do listen to the podcast. I just found that really interesting because for some reason I hadn't noticed it. I've been in this industry for a long time, and I'd kind of accepted that CLOs were, these big important people, even though I've been to forums where they are reporting to global heads of talent and so on. But that's an interesting program.
Well, can I give you a little bit of the story behind that a little bit?
Yeah.
Where that's going? Because I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. I'm going to talk about it on the talk today. When I got into L&D in 98, CLOs were the first CLO that I think everybody knows was the CLO of GE, John Kerr.
Yeah.
Who was really a transformation officer. He was really like the chief transformation officer. And I think Jack Welch gave him the job of retraining all the leaders in GE to do things the new GE way.
Yeah.
And so in my early days in L&D, I met a lot of CLOs who were very senior people, peers of the CHRO, not reporting to them. And they had transformation jobs. And then along came the internet, and they had to deal with the LMS and all of that, internet-based training stuff, and then the globalization of that. And it was you remember there were a lot of magazines about CLOs, there were a lot of events, there was a lot of discussion about this important job and what it meant. And in the last 20 years, that role got sort of demoted it got sucked into HR, and then demoted under the head of talent, and sometimes even lower than that. So it still kept the title, but it had this broad global responsibility, but it got stuck inside of HR. So, of course, what happened was all of the manufacturing, sales, logistics groups said, we're not waiting for them. We're going to do our own thing.
Yeah.
Because they need to train people anyway. So I think the L&D function became much less centralized and much more distributed, which, of course, costs more money, and there's all sorts of complexities to managing that. So to some degree, the ability for this CLO person to get a whole bunch of money to do something new kind of got diminished because the HR department had a bunch of other things to do. They were building skills stuff. They were trying to do recruiting. They were working on taxonomies and job design and implementing Workday. And the ERPs said, hey, just use our LMS. You don't need your own LMS. So a lot of the innovation that we were involved in earlier kind of stopped, other than the LXP, which turned out to be kind of a good idea, but not as big, great as everybody hoped. So there hasn't been a lot of money or ability for CLOs to transform what they were doing, and the tools weren't that much different. So even if you did replace your LMS from vendor A to vendor B, it isn't going to be that much better, because they're all sort of similar. Now we have these spectacularly different systems. We have the mandate from on high that we want AI to be a big part of our company strategy. The CHRO is fully on board. What we need the L&D people to do is to put together a really groundbreaking, innovative AI strategy and sell it to the rest of the company so that everybody gets aligned with this. I think a lot of L&D people aren't used to doing that. They haven't done that for 20 years.
Yeah.
They're not used to having that opportunity.
So you're saying that AI, in a way, there's a possibility there that's the key to this seat at the top table.
I think it's this. That's one way to put it. But I think it's also a threat that if you don't get to know what this stuff is and figure out how to use it, as I said before, somebody else is going to do it for you, and you're not going to be there anymore.
Yeah.
Because this stuff is not that hard to use. You don't have to be a PhD in instructional design to turn on an AI tool and build a course. Unfortunately, for those who have PhDs in instructional design.
Yeah. So potentially could be, potentially not.
Well, I mean, I think everybody who's a learning enthusiast and a learning guru is going to want to be involved in this, because just like every other learning technology we've ever had, it's how you use it and how you implement it that makes a difference. But it's just got power that we've never had before.
Yeah. Going back to the vendor market, is the investment community there to
That's a really good
that
question.
growth?
What I've seen in my conversations with investors, I talk to investors quite a bit, they got burned in the learning market.
Yeah.
A lot of them put a bunch of money into LMSs or content companies and they flopped. I mean, Coursera, Pluralsight, Udemy, Skillsoft, they haven't been great for investors, really. So a lot of the investors would rather invest in an AI startup or a recruiting startup or, a new payroll system or, a system of record type of vendor. And the learning space kind of didn't turn out to be a good investment thesis. I think that's coming back, and I think there will be some really successful companies in this domain again, and then that'll spawn more investors.
You think possibly that the AI native startup is a more attractive prospect in that case than give us a couple of billion, please, we're in an established LMS?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, the company we partner with on our AI is Sana, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think their market cap is as high as they'd probably like, but they're a pretty cool, successful AI startup that's focused primarily on learning, but also on other areas. So I think there's an opportunity now for people that have good ideas to get some good seed money and really do some cool things.
Right. Okay.
If you start an LXP company and try to get funding, though, you're not going to get anything.
Well, yeah, that was a couple of years ago. That was... So 5-10 years ago, Trent? I don't remember.
Yeah, it seemed like a good idea at the time, but it just didn't. It turned out it was kind of the same. It was a better implementation of the old paradigm.
Yeah, and I think most people just saw it as a good front end to a bad LMS. Yeah, right. So generally, what's your advice to people in the people space about dealing with the tumultuous change we're going through, avoiding the Scylla and Charybdis, if you like, of the, I'm pronouncing that right, the whirlpool of anxiety and panic versus rock of complacency?
I think most L&D people are tinkerers. They like technology. They're not intimidated by technology. They're used to doing a lot of new things and having a lot of tools. You got to jump into this. You got to get your hands on these things, experiment with them, see how powerful they are, learn about prompting, learn about content, learn about how the systems work. This is going to be your future as a career. So rather than waiting for your incumbent vendors to give you a feature that you decide you might want to turn on, I think you want to kind of disrupt yourself by learning about it. I mean, I think it was like this in the early days of technology, both PC technology and internet technology, that you had to try to build your own course to figure out how hard it was going to be. Remember when we had Dreamweaver and Course Builder and those old course building tools? The people that got their hands dirty and used those tools quickly figured out what worked and what didn't work, and then kind of moved ahead in their careers to do more exciting things. And the AI stuff's changing so fast. I mean, now they can do real-time voice, they can do translation, they can create videos, they can create characters, they can be tutors, they can be coaches. I mean, our AI is a we call it a consultant, because you ask it a question and then it starts asking you questions to try to help you figure out the answer to what your problem is. So, I think that's the number one thing, is just make sure you're not getting left behind or intimidated by this stuff. You don't have to be a computer science to learn how to use AI. You don't have to even be a software engineer.
Yeah. This is another question list, but do you think there's always been this thread in learning technologies, since I've been working in it, that perhaps you could use generics for this, generic products like, PowerPoint, Word, blah, 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 productivity tools. And of course, we all have this, OpenAI's products, Anthropic and all those, Claude. Do we really need specialized learning products? It's a learning product in itself.
It's a good question. If you look at what Sana does, or Arist, or UpLimit, some of these tools that I know that are all AI, they are built on those platforms. So what those vendors, they didn't build an LLM. They're using off-the-shelf LLMs. But what they've done is they've built all sorts of infrastructure on top of it so that it's finely tuned for learning use cases.
Right.
But if you're an IT department and you have a giant, team of people working on infrastructure, and maybe you've licensed your own LLM and you've built your own thing, you could do this yourself. I don't think most L&D departments are going to bother. It's probably not worth their time. But you can go to ChatGPT today, upload, your company's onboarding document and ask it to build a 5-day course, and it'll give you a course outline. It'll probably be great.
Yeah.
It may not generate the materials in the course, but you can go pretty far with the off-the-shelf tools too.
Right. So, I don't want to keep you too long. I know you've got another talk to prepare for. Lastly, who do you follow and listen to? I noticed that when I ask this question nowadays, people don't like to mention other names so much. It's either because they're always the same, Simon Sinek, or the guy from Anthropic or whatever, or else they don't want to send clicks off to other people's websites. But who?
Oh, I'm
not necessarily in the industry, but outside as well.
I would say that. I read everything I can get my hands on. I read all the magazines, and I have subscription to virtually every business magazine and every technology magazine I can get my hands on. I listen. I actually am. I think a lot of the reason I'm pretty good at seeing where things is going is I don't only live in HR and L&D. I spend a lot of time looking at the business world, the technology industry in general, the political world that's going on around it. So I think I can see sort of the relationship between what we're dealing with in HR and L&D and all that stuff. So I'm basically reading the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and the Financial Times and the Economist, and I get a lot of my ideas about what's going to happen in HR and L&D from them.
Yeah.
And then in the domain, I basically read everything that everybody else reads and try to talk to people at these conferences and see who's doing cool stuff. And then we get a lot of insights from clients. We spend a lot of time with vendors, first of all. I think the vendor part of the market usually is where the innovations come from.
All right.
Not from the corporate side.
Still.
Usually. And so I'm always willing to talk to small vendors and new vendors to see what they're doing, because they usually have one customer who's doing something unbelievably interesting that everybody else could do if they even knew this existed.
Yeah.
And then I try to not read self-proclaimed experts, because I think we have to all be learners and be humble about this because it's changing so fast. And I happen to be the type of person who learns by reading, so I don't mind reading a book or watching a long podcast or something, or video. So there's nobody in particular really that I can think of as a name.
Yeah, okay. You may not particularly want to answer this one, and it's kind of an optional question, I suppose, but you wrote about the impact of the DEI firestorm that's hitting HR a lot. Do you have anything you feel able to say about that?
Yeah, it's a very unfortunate, sort of sad situation in the United States, what's going on. I live in a very integrated heterogeneous city in California, so I'm very familiar with the issues, in terms of daily life. Right now, the Supreme Court, basically outlawed affirmative action, and so the DEI community got a little bit too focused on social justice and not enough focused on business-related issues and fairness at work. And so I think it just tweaked people and became a political firestorm that has now turned into a pushback on all DEI. I think most of the companies I talk to, and I know many of the people that are probably watching this podcast will agree with this, is DEI as a philosophy, as a business strategy has not gone away. It may not be called that anymore, but most companies know, CEOs and everybody else, that if we're not fair and transparent and inclusive and open-minded, we can't grow our company. We can't hire people. We can't manage innovative ideas. We don't have a good culture. So whether you call it DEI or not, a lot of these principles remain. And so, I think right now we're just in this kind of right-wing political environment for maybe a few more years, and then we'll move on to something else.
Okay. I'll let you get on with your day. Thank you very much for sharing that, Josh.
Thank you, John.
Lovely to speak.
Okay, you too.
Yes. This podcast is supported by a new spring.
Struggling to make your training really stick? The Growth Training Improvement Model helps you spot what's missing and what to improve. It's practical, research-based, and built for learning professionals who truly want to create impactful training. Discover where you stand and get clear tips to grow. Go to anewspring.com/GTIM and boost your training.
Hack Facts.
Dr. Daniel Hulme is CEO of Satalia and Chief AI Officer at WPP, the communications group, specializing in artificial intelligence and organizational design. He's a TEDx speaker, advisor to global businesses on AI strategy, and an advocate for ethical AI development. My interview with Daniel explored how businesses must rethink decision-making, productivity, and ethics in an AI-driven future. He argues that agentic computing and moral adaptability are key to human-centered progress. So Daniel, welcome to the Learning Hack. Great to have you on.
It's good to be here, thank you.
Yeah, well, especially after that amazing presentation you just given. You've been working in AI now since well before it became such a hot topic. It's had AI summers and AI winters, and now very much hot summer. But what first pulled you into the field?
I think when you start to kind of explore questions around consciousness and can a machine be conscious? Can you upload your consciousness? What's our point in the universe? You can't help kind of get involved in science fiction, and science fiction. There's a huge amount of content around robots and machines, and so very early on when I was 12. Leaning into some of these questions sort of led me into the field of computer science. So my undergraduate was in AI at UCL 25 years ago.
Okay. So what's your personal view of how AI has evolved over that time?
Well, I think there are different ways that people define AI. And one of the things I talk about are different ways of thinking about AI rather than, I think, a popular definition, which is getting computers to do things that humans can do. The fact is that there are algorithms that have been developed in academia over the past many decades that are really useful at solving problems in industry. And so I think what we tend to see, though, is this kind of the same thing over again, where people get excited about emerging technologies. 9 years ago, it was machine learning, data science. Now it's generative AI, and then they try and apply those technologies to solving the wrong problems. And so I've been developing frameworks to think about how do you make sure you're applying the right algorithms to the right problems and placing the right bets. The fact is that generative AI, I think, caught everybody by surprise, and the trajectory in terms of how these technologies are accelerating, and because of kind of the arms race that's been created by the generative AI, I think we're facing into big exciting questions that we're facing as a species over the next 5-10 years. But I guess in summary, it's really great that people are leaning into this subject and now start to understand and appreciate the consequences of either getting it wrong or getting it right.
Yeah, I've heard a certain amount of frustration at the conference talking to people who've been in the AI for a while, that it's kind of all about Gen AI now. And they take that as a kind of proxy for the whole field. And they say, well, no, there's several different types of it. But my response to that was that it's been called the revenge of the liberal arts majors, that when it became an event in language rather than an event in maths, suddenly loads of terrible people like me got interested in it. And that's led to where we are at the moment. But you give a very kind of compelling and articulate description of the possibilities. But looking at how we feel it's going to develop over the next few years, techno-optimism aside, having been around with the first wave of kind of adoption of digital technologies in learning through the growth of the internet and so on, we saw that there was a lot of kind of friction that came into it. Things didn't happen as quickly as they should have done. It took 10 years for mobile learning really to get going. Had to wait for the smartphone to arrive. Predictions about the growth of AI that are optimistic very often kind of see a straight line progression. You have a graph with a kind of nice straight line left to right of where we're going to be 4 or 5. But, in the real world, there is friction, and it's based on a model of ownership which hasn't changed. And, commercial interests, all sorts of other things, bits of kit not working together, all that kind of stuff tends to slow things down. So why do you think those gains so often stall in technology adoption? And do you think AI really is going to be any different to that, or is it going to follow the same pattern?
Great questions. I think there are two things here. One is the progression and acceleration of the capability of these technologies, and that's not going to slow down. And that straight line that you referred to, I sort of argued that 3 years ago, AIs are a little bit like intoxicated graduates. They're now sort of graduating to master's level, soon PhD level, postdoc level, and by the end of this decade we'll have a professor in our pocket. Now, how quickly those technologies will be adopted and embraced by companies is a very different question. And what again tends to happen is that we apply those technologies to solving the wrong problems. There's algorithms. The fact is, there are algorithms that have been developed 10, 20, 30 years ago that could be driving massive amount of value now in industry that haven't been adopted because infrastructure isn't there, or people are not aware that those algorithms actually are appropriate to solve their problems. I think the reason why it now is interesting is that people have woken up to mathematics, to AI, to algorithms being a key driver in reducing costs in their organizations and unlocking more revenue. And really that's the driver now. And I think getting that right is critical. Companies can't afford to get it wrong. They can't afford for the next 3 years to do misinvestments. They can't afford to wait for a data lake to be there to be able to adopt AI. And I think that's really what the world has woken up to. But the technology will continue to progress. And I think those companies that are going to survive and thrive are the ones that adopt it sensibly.
Do you think we're going to start to get some last mile problems there? I mean, productivity, which you mentioned, is a key issue. And it has been a problem that technology hasn't driven the type of productivity increases we'd really like to have seen in the last few years. Particularly in the UK, productivity has been extremely flat. Will last mile problems impact on AI's ability to deliver better productivity? Because your capability is one thing, but actual kind of the thing working and improving productivity is a slightly different one.
Indeed. So, and I think what we've seen again over the past decade is that there was this impulse that by giving human beings better insights, that they were able to go on and make better decisions. And I think the reality is that isn't true. I think humans are sort of bounded by our decision-making capability. So I'm actually a big advocate of getting the technology to solve the problem directly, but making sure that you're doing that in a way that where there's a human in the loop, identifying where the AI is going wrong, and over time give it more capability, more access, more decision-making scope. So I think rather than trying to use AI to enable human beings to make better decisions, get the AI to make the decision, and then have the human being allow the AI to broaden its decision-making scope, and that I've seen be a successful approach. by organizations. But as long as you've got human being the decider, I think that you'll always have that last mile problem. You'll always have a bit of a bottleneck.
As we see AI come into the development of new solutions and new companies, it's starting to be a thing that there is a bit of a difference, a divide between companies that are AI from the ground up, if you like. Well, that's the foundation of the way the company started, and those who are adding it as a bolt-on. And the bolt-on people tend to be the much larger companies that have been around for a while and have all kind of entrenched relationships and access to beyond the corporate firewall and so on. Who, in your view, is doing it well? Both perhaps as AI from the ground up and AI as a bolt-on?
Well, the sort of signals that I look for are, one, our organization is using it to improve core productivity. And whilst that will drive benefits, it won't necessarily differentiate you. Are organizations identifying frictions across their supply chain where AI will differentiate their business, and building solutions are differentiated, and are organizations identifying where they are going to be disrupted by startups and have a mechanism in place to be able to deal with that. Whilst we are going to see lots and lots of startups and companies appearing, the reality is that if you're an organization that has system of record, i.e., it manages data for somebody else, etc., migrating that to a startup is a very risky and actually laborious thing to do. So even if large organizations are not necessarily adopting and embracing AI as quickly as startups, there's still a lot of stickiness in terms of how organizations sustain themselves. But I think what's quite exciting about the concept of agents is agents are like a digital workforce, and if we get them right, in some respects, those digital agents are going to help those larger organizations operate much more effectively and efficiently. So a lot of those challenges that organizations have faced in the past in being able to adapt, go through change management, et cetera, could actually be accelerated by the support of agents. But let's see.
Could there be some friction that comes in there with kind of existing governance structures and so on, which startups don't necessarily have?
I think, being an entrepreneur myself, when you're starting a company, you don't have a lot of processes and structures that actually are necessary to operate and actually necessary to be able to provide goods to clients. So some clients would expect you to be like ISO 27001 certified, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that whilst again, agentic computing will mean that we'll have to figure out how do we combine physical employees with digital employees, and there are processes and structures in place to do that. It does give us an opportunity to change the way that we operate an organization. And again, startups have the benefit of being able to reinvent themselves from scratch, whereas large organizations need to go through that change management. But I still think that large organizations do have a lot of stickiness.
Yeah. And large organisations, we're hearing, are completely focused on growth at the moment. It's not just in the UK, but it seems everywhere. So that's some hope. You've been vocal on the risks of ethnic washing in tech. What is that? And if there's one urgent intervention needed to keep AI aligned with human interests in policy or practice, what would that be?
I don't know if I've been vocal in ethnic washing, because I don't even know if I've said it.
Where that PPTs?
All right, that's wrong. Sorry,
of Helmer, and
so that's an example of ChatGPT being an intoxicated writer and making something up. I don't think I've ever even said those two words together. Ethnic washing. But I am interested in AI's impact on society, and I am interested in how we can elevate everybody from economic constraints to allow those people to be able to contribute to humanity in new ways. But I don't think I've ever said those two words together.
I think this is probably an example of intoxication.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. You're talking about indeed. Yeah. But on that question of ethics, I mean, that came up in your talk, and I think the question it raises for me is, we can use AI we can help it to be morally aligned and so on, but whose morals and whose values? I mean, isn't that a rather knotty question? It's not something that people agree about, really.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm very interested in not embedding necessarily one moral structure or set of values. I'm interested in how do we understand the moral structure, the values of an AI, and then that will allow us to then make decisions to be able to then change its moral structure. I'm not dictating any one moral system over another, but I am interested in making sure that we surface and understand the sort of, I guess, conscious and unconscious behaviors of these technologies.
Right. So as AI gets embedded in workflows and decision-making, and you talk quite a bit about decision-making as being a very important thing. It's interesting because my last interviewee was completely different field in the medical field, educating surgeons in decision-making in how to do kind of diagnosis through treatment and everything. So it's kind of a theme. But what's your take on the most critical human skills that we need to cultivate? Not just to say relevant, but how to thrive, and decision-making being important in that.
I don't think that this is a profound answer. I think we all agree that developing resilience, robustness, critical thinking, adaptation, creativity, these are all things that we value in ourselves and other human beings. I think our education system is really not set up to cultivate those attributes. Really, our education system is set up to test for knowledge, as opposed to application of knowledge in diverse and challenging situations. That said, I hope that the AI will help us solve that problem. But I think one thing I would argue is that humans are incredibly adaptive, and it's one of the things that make us is quite unique is because of our ability to adapt. And I use this definition of AI that comes from the definition of intelligence, which is goal-directed adaptive behavior. And I argue that adaptation is the critical ingredient to intelligence. So I am hopeful that that humans will adapt to these changes that are coming our way.
Marvelous. Yeah. We've got through the questions a lot quicker than I do with most people because you talk so fast. And then you made me drink coffee to make me talk quickly as well. So well done. So finally, what challenges are you thinking about right now, and who helps you to think through those? What voices do you follow? What kind of your sources of inspiration, perhaps not within learning or even within tech?
Well, first of all, I say to people often that, if something's a surprise to me, then I'm not doing my job properly. So my job is to kind of make sure that I'm predicting the future in hopefully a relatively confident and robust way. I tend to just kind of stare at walls and think about frameworks. I try to simplify a lot of the complexity, particularly around this subject, into frameworks for me to understand and then to apply. And I think the reason why I do these talks is because people find those frameworks quite useful. But I mean, the big things that I'm focused on right now are helping WPP accelerate their digital transformation. So making sure that they're the leader in using AI in media marketing communications to figure out how AI is disrupting that entire industry. But I'm also very interested in this new startup that I've created called Consume, which is trying to figure out if we can build safe, morally aligned, conscious AI. So these are big, juicy questions, and that's really what is keeping me engaged is this big question around, can we make sure that we're building AI that's going to ensure that humanity is going to have a great future.
Yeah.
But in terms of people I follow, I think just like everybody else, we get bombarded by my things on LinkedIn and podcasts and the news. I find a lot of it
somewhat bombarding.
Yeah, no. I find a lot of it sort of 101. It's just people regurgitating what they've heard elsewhere. So there's the idea that the AI is getting computers to do things that humans can do. The idea that AI is biased. Now, AI is biased, but the fact is it's able to start to reason and check itself. And the fact that people say that we're running out of the world's data now, yes, we are running out of the world's data, but we're able to interact with the world and learn and create new data. So I think there's a lot of rhetoric out there, and I try to not get distracted by that rhetoric because my job is to actually to be a thought leader and to challenge how people think about these technologies. And again, that's one of the reasons why I enjoy doing these talks.
Yeah, I think the thing about bias is puzzling to me because the AI is us. It's a kind of aggregation of us.
Yeah.
We all have biases.
Well, yeah, exactly.
Kind of in there, so you can't strip them out. So it's like, I want a non-biased AI.
Impossible.
Whereas you find me a non-biased human.
Exactly.
But it was really interesting, sort of on that point, in what you were saying about creating. I think maybe I made a leap here, but it seemed to me like with your work with kind of marketing, that you could create digital AI agents who would tell you how certain types of people would think and feel.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, okay, digital focus groups, and we use personas in some bits of kind of, especially it was very popular in web design, has been questioned. But those kind of marketing techniques of focus groups and it's political techniques as well, that and personas. Do you see AI being really useful for that? Or are they being used? Is that working at the moment?
100%, yeah. So, a lot of emphasis is on content creation, but I would argue you can create any content you want, but unless you understand how that content is being perceived, then you're wasting your time. And so actually what you need to do is you need to build biased AIs that represent certain communities that have their biases. You can
rather saying let's get a non-biased AI, let's get a room full of biased AI
representatives.
It's completely different. So we've got a farmer and we've got a Labour voter and a Reform voter and a capitalist and a communist and all the rest of it. Put them around a table, let them fight it out, tell them what they think of our ad.
In some respects, that's sort of the power of agentic computing, is that you've got these different specialized experts that are able to collaborate and communicate and reason and actually come up, hopefully, with a better solution because you have different perspectives.
All right, okay. So we will be building an AI version of the ideal learning hack listener, or a table full of AI resurgence of learning hack listeners, and they can all say what they think of this.
There we go.
John, you need to learn to talk as fast as Daniel. Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a pleasure talking to us today, and good luck with the rest of your engagements today. I know you've got a very busy calendar, but it's been brilliant to talk to you.
Super. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Hack Facts.
David Kelly is the outgoing chair of the Learning Guild, a prominent US-based community for learning professionals. He's known for curating insights on emerging technologies and instructional design, and for leading initiatives like DevLearn and the Learning Leaders Conference. I asked David to reflect on over a decade in learning technology, highlighting performance support, AI's impact on work, and the evolving role of L&D in a world reshaped by digital transformation. Great to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here.
Welcome to the Learning Hack. You've recently stepped down from the Guild. You've been at the heart of it for over a decade. What are the biggest changes you've seen in learning technology space during that time and the Vantage?
Oh, there's been a lot of, it's funny though, the more things change in learning tech, the more they seem to stay the same.
Yeah.
We have seen technology. What excites me about the changes that I know is we now have the ability to increasingly support people closer to the work itself. As compared to when I first started, even before I was with the Guild, there was more of in order to give someone some sort of a learning resource, you had to interrupt their work in order to get them to learn. More and more technology is giving us the opportunity to support them during their work. And that to me is where it should be. And the more we get into that space, the more exciting it becomes.
Yeah. A few years back, quite a lot of years back now, there was a lot of excitement about learning in the flow of work being the big thing, which is kind of what you're talking about. Could dispute whether it's actually happened that much. We've really seen training pushed out into the place of work more. Well, I know people closed down their training centers and stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting the word choice there, because have I seen people pushing training there? Not so much. But have I seen people and organizations finding ways to just support people? I mean, we tend to have this view that of what learning looks like, and it's this packaged thing of content that might give people. But the organizations that I do see doing some interesting stuff around this idea of the flow of learning within the flow of work are using technology in a way that's different. They're using it They're using technology that has the signals to recognize when people are struggling and what resource might be necessary to get them to do it. In some cases, it may not even be learning. And I think that we need to be okay with that, because our work is really focused on supporting performance. learning tends to be the method that we use it the most often. But our job is about supporting performance. And if we can give someone the support they need to do their job, get in, give them the support, help them succeed in a task and get out of the way. If they didn't learn anything, that's okay. It doesn't feel like it's okay, but it can be okay to just give people the resources they need to be successful in their job. If they need to do it repeatedly, then yes, of course, learning how to do it and building a skill around it is important. But our ability to solve someone's performance problem in the moment can be a very transformative thing, even if it may not necessarily be learning in the way that we define it in practice.
Okay. That's an interesting change that you've seen then. Before we talk more about kind of what you're going to do next and so on, we rewind a bit. How did you first get involved with learning? It's always interesting the paths by which people come into this industry, because they're really straight. I mean, it's really that, when you're a kid at school, you're thinking, when I grow up, I want to be a CLO.
Yeah. I followed the path that many in our field have done, in the sense that, I kind of stumbled into this accidentally. I started my career in finance. I was in a banking field. And like many people are in the L&D space, I was very good at my job. And my bosses noticed that I was good at my job. So I said, you should go show other people how to do that. And I was fortunate just through life experiences that the bank that I was working for went through a number of acquisitions. They were acquiring a lot of different banks. So every time that there was a new group that came on, they were kind of like, go show them how to do this. And go have show this job. And I've wound up spending more of my time training people on how to be a banker than I did actually doing the banking itself. And at some point it just became you're doing really, really great work here. Can you take over our training department? And from that moment on, I stopped being a finance professional and started being an L&D professional, and just discovered how much I loved it, and discovered I just became a student of the field. I became a passionate user of the field, and stopped being a finance person and started being an L&D person. And since then my career has just kind of been in that space of just immersing myself at the intersection of learning and technology, and really expanding the influence that I can have to help other people grow.
It's interesting because M&A's in the banking sector and taken over, because you must have had to not only engage with training people in the functional skills, but every bank feels that they do it slightly differently. I mean, but it's going to go back to the days when I worked at a bespoke content creation company, and we had 5 banking clients, and they would get together and say, look, you're doing time management courses for all of us. Yeah. We could just get one course on the list. But then they would decide no, because our brand is that we do it this way. And if you don't do it that way, I don't think that's an unremarked piece of what makes training very individual, local and specific, perhaps.
It is. I think talking about the change that we've seen in the course of our careers, I think there's more awareness of the importance of that, because at the time when I was doing it, I would actually bring that up and be like, this is a very different bank than where we were. It's not just about what buttons they need to press. They need to understand what it means to work for this bank. And there wasn't really a lot of buy-in for that. There was just kind of, no, they need to know what buttons to press. Don't worry about the cultural piece. And that's where a lot of those M&As tend to fail, is around the people integration that came in there. But at the time they were doing so many M&As, they weren't really concerned about that.
Yeah. You started out as an instructional designer and trainer. What did that hands-on experience teach you that shaped your later leadership?
I think growing through the field, I never lost track of the frontline people, the people that are actually doing the work. That's always been really important to me. It's always been, even before I knew it from an L&D perspective of why it's important, it was always, I would get a new project that would come to me from a stakeholder saying, my people need this. And there was always that instinct of, okay, I'm going to go talk to your people. I'm not just going to take what you're saying and deliver it. I want to go talk to your people about it, because they live it every single day. And it wasn't the way I understand it now from a pedagogical standpoint of connecting with the people and understanding that sort of stuff. It felt like the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And that's always been an approach to the way that I try to be in every organization that I've worked for, is that there is, I don't care what an org chart looks like, you connect with the people who are doing the job. And you could put it in the context of leadership. Leadership is about who's willing to follow you, and without connecting to those people, why would they?
Yeah. So under your leadership, the guild has grown and evolved in many ways. What are you proudest of having achieved during your time there?
Oh, that's a great question. I think what always makes me most proud, I mean, it's funny, I was talking with someone else about this earlier today. There's always the event that we host where we bring thousands of people together. And there's always the last day when people are starting to go through and they see you in the hall and like, oh, it was a great event. This is so wonderful. And that's having that moment where people are in the moment and they're really, really enjoying it and they appreciate all the work that went into experience it. That's great. But what really has always fueled me was when it's weeks later, months later, or even the next year of the conference, when someone comes up to me and says, I was here last year and we learned X, Y, and Z, and we brought it back to our organization and it's completely transformed the way that we do things. That has always fueled me because I remember when I first joined the Guild, I'm very passionate about the field of what we're in. And when they were recruiting me to come, what I was very happy working for a nonprofit at the time. And like, you should come join the Guild. I was like, I'm happy. Thank you. No, thank you. And they kept coming. And what ultimately sold me is like, you speak at these events, you share what you are passionate about so that others can learn from it. And I see that the work that you do, you enjoy the seeing that impact, seeing how people grow. What if you could do that at scale? If you do the stuff here, you have the ability to help the field and all of those people go out and help those people. And I was like, wow, that was a really good pitch. That worked out really well for me. Because that was always what drove me with the Guild, is the ability for, even in our own small way, to participate in the industry conversation. And it helps in a way to push it forward.
All right. And it built under your leadership, had a great reputation for community and industry leadership. Some say that it played it a bit safe, that it hasn't really been the kind of beating heart of changes and disruption in the way that perhaps other people would like to see it to be. How do you respond to this criticism?
Of the Guild itself?
Of the Guild, yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple of different angles to that. I mean, the Guild is a business on one level, so we have to respond to the business, but you want to be ahead of that curve. So there is that delicate balance between we want to drive the industry forward, we want to be a source of change and community, but at the same time, the industry, we are still a business that needs to, the Guild is still a business that needed to run. Admittedly, the L&D portion of it was always what fueled me, but as a company grows and gets bigger, you gotta find ways to support the business end of it as well.
Yeah. Is there things slightly in there culturally that when you become a kind of representative body like that, and you're seen as giving industry leadership, you kind of have to be there for the majority and to reflect the existing culture of it away. So you can't push too hard. You can't go out on a limb.
I think there's a bit of that. I think that for me at least, because during my time at the Guild, I was the most visible person within the Guild.
Yeah.
And you want to push, but you also, I mean, one of the things that was always big for me as part of it is, if you have a criticism, throw the darts. Like I want to hear that, because while it's never easy sometimes to hear that criticism, you learn from it and you can grow from it. And I was always prone into that, is if you have feedback, if you have critical feedback, let me hear it, because I want to hear how we could be better. So I think that there is that balance to move things forward. I also think that there's an authenticity that can be attached to that I think is when you look at something like the Guild, that the community has always historically been at the heart of that. Without that authenticity, some of those criticisms that you bring up start to bubble up, and that's something that evolves as you grow.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a way, talk about the past. I'm sure you're keen to talk about what you're doing next. Tell us what you're up to now.
Yeah, I'm looking. I mean, one of the things that's, after being with the Guild for 12 plus years, there's my brand was very associated with the Guild, and vice versa. My brand was. I mean, there are people who see me at the show right now, and they're surprised not to see me in a blue shirt.
Yeah,
because I've been wearing it for 12 plus years. I'm passionate. I mean, the guild has grown to a certain extent under my leadership, and it's grown to a point where I spent a large portion of my time managing the business of the guild, which was it's not right or wrong. It's not a complaint. It's just what it was. And I was very passionate about it. I loved the stuff that we built at the guild. But now that I'm no longer part of the guild, I don't have that weight, and there's a lot of stuff that I would have liked to have done. People who come to me and say, "Can you help me with this project?" That was always in this space of conflict of interest, or I can't really do that. And now I have the freedom to explore that space, which even in the short time that I've been doing it now, is invigorating. So while I will always miss being a part of the guild and what we built there, there's opportunity in everything. I'm a firm believer in that, and I'm already seeing some of the opportunities of things that fuel me just in a different way that I'm looking forward to exploring.
So can you share anything that you're up to at the moment and the direction you're like it's going?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'm working on. I have the privilege of working with a couple of different companies that have kind of got me on an advisory level. That's there. I'm sure that a lot of that'll be public now. It's kind of their story to tell before it's mine. So I don't want to necessarily skip that. I've started working behind the scenes with them and doing stuff there. I'm very passionate about the work that we do. I do have a period of time where some of the stuff that I intend to do next, I can't do yet because of non-competes and things of that sort.
Oh yeah.
I love the energy that comes from an event like Learning Technologies, and I'm looking forward to continuing to support organizations like them, leveraging the expertise that I have both as an event producer and an L&D expert. So there's kind of the whole world is my oyster kind of a thing, and I'm looking forward to that. That's also the looking for what organization I want to spend the majority of my time, because living in America, there's always that wrinkle of healthcare is linked to work very often, unfortunately.
Yeah.
That was my next phase for what it is, because there's a phase before I get to the phase after that, is going to be a mix between some organization that I contribute the majority of my time to, while also exploring the new opportunities that are available to me without the constraints that, again, not a negative, but the constraints that were part of the agreement of what I did with the guild.
Okay. A big topic at the show, it was a big topic at the show last year, AI. This year, I think your co-presenter, Danny Johnson, said it was a make or break year for AI. We're starting to see it kind of seeping into the solutions and propositions and new startups emerging in the vendor market and so on. AI literacy becoming a big thing and so on. And there's a feeling of lots of opportunities, a feeling of great threats. Do you really feel it's as kind of black and white as that? Is it really a crunch year for you? And what's your particular take on it?
I know it sounds like a cop-out, but I think it depends to a certain extent. I think for some organizations, it is going to be a make or break year. If you're an organization that's all in on AI and you're dealing with a leader who sees this as an opportunity to increase efficiency and decrease costs, then yeah, it's going to be a make or break year to be in alignment with that strategy. If you're in an organization that's just in the play stage of just kind of exploring it, but we're not fully committed, we want to see things shake out, then I think that you have more of an opportunity to stay ahead of that. I think that I tend to lean towards the opportunity that presents itself for L&D professionals around AI. But for me, I think what I find interesting both at this show and the industry conversation in general is I think we're focused a little bit too much on our own usage of the tools. As compared to how the emergence of these tools is changing work itself. I touched on that a little bit in the opening session today, because I think our job fundamentally at its core is to support the workforce.
Yeah.
And if we're introducing tools into the workforce that are changing the way work gets done, then by definition, our work in supporting them needs to adapt to that.
All right.
And there's so much attention being placed on, holy cow, how much more efficient are we going to be as L&D professionals to do what we do with these tools? that I think we're missing the bigger picture of no, work itself is changing, and we have to be following along with that so that we can properly support it as we go forward.
Yeah, on that theme, I was talking to someone just before this interview, actually, and saying, what would you ask them? And what she said was really interesting, but she would like to get an answer to that problem of, okay, AI is coming in, taking away a lot of the grunt work, and we see this in professions like legal and so on, and will certainly be the case in financial, that a lot of grunt work, which would normally have been done by a kind of first jobber, for instance, can now be picked up by AI in the hands of a kind of seasoned and experienced person. And so it's like you've got your kind of intern and first jobber on tap. And that's kind of my experience of using ChatGPT to help me out. Podcasts, I say, it used to be a team doing my podcasts, and now most of that I can do using AI. But this raises the question of where do people get experience from now? Because that kind of, the early roles might not be there anymore, that you know, straight out of college, go into a company, learn the ropes, learn how to do the stuff. Yeah. And it's been an issue that's been picked up in the legal field a while ago. So, you know, the kind of indentured slaves who started their careers as lawyers would have to do an awful lot of grunt work, working through old cases and things like this. And that through that they would progress to more congenial work, but they would have the experience of having gone through that. Yeah. Now people won't necessarily have the experience of having gone through that because an AI has done all that sifting and sorting. How do we deal with that potential gap?
There are a number of things in the AI conversation that I think go ahead of L&D and are more of a global, there are things we need to figure out of what are use cases. I think that's an example of it. I think that the chat, I think there's going to be a reshuffling of what work looks like as part of the introduction to these tools. And I think that's a part of it, of like, how do you get these experiences? And how is AI represented in the pyramid itself? You know, when we talk about the use of, like your example, you use these tools to help you put the podcast together. But at some point, you're not going to go into ChatGPT and do these things. You're just going to have an AI tool that just does it, and it's just part of your production cycle. So then it's not a matter of, instead of having John do this particular task for me, I'm going to type in a prompt and have ChatGPT do it. You're just going to have a piece of tech that just does that for you, and it just happens for you.
I can see the way we're on that progress. Yeah, I mean, last year I would have asked it to kind of draft me a summary or something. This year I'll ask it to draft a summary, put it together with the timings, turn it to show notes, format it as a Word document and output it. And it can do several more of those steps than it could last year. That's quite dizzying progress. So I can see we're kind of on the way to that. If we get to the point where it's, sit down with David Kelly and ask him a series of questions and get him to talk, I'm no longer in the room anymore. I don't necessarily elect to believe that's not going to happen. But people who come into my situation as podcasters haven't gone through that thing of writing their own show notes, doing their own editing, doing their own audio stuff, adjusting kind of EQ on voice files and so on, but can just let an AI do it.
Well, the challenge we're going to eventually get to, and I think it's one of those things that the world is going to need to figure out, is right now we've got this finite period where someone like yourself can offload all of that to AI, and AI becomes kind of like the great assistant that you have that has no common sense. And you can take the output and very quickly scan it and redline what needs to be changed, because it's going to make mistakes, at least in this stage. So you can see this needs to change, this needs to change, this needs to change, but it saved you an enormous amount of time. What happens when the next podcast or whoever the task is comes in? Where is all of the knowledge and skills that you bring to the table that are able to have you scan something very quickly? That's going to be a gap. That's going to be a gap that workplaces, educational institutions and such are going to need to figure out what it's there. at an overly simplified level. I was having a conversation at a college a couple of months ago. I remember this came up. They were fixated, and it wound up. It started in a place of talking about AI being used to cheat, how students were going to use it to cheat, and it wound up pivoting into the space of how the introduction of these tools is going to need to change what higher education looks like. Because I said, for me, when I was in school, I'm dating myself, but when I was in school, if I walked into a classroom with a calculator, I'd get a 0 on that test and be told that I was cheating. But the world has evolved in a place where calculators are just ubiquitously available to us as a tool on our phones. So my son's in class and he's got a calculator because he's always going to have a calculator available to him. And it's just part of the influence. We got to go through that same process with these Gen AI tools of what does it mean to, like, we had this very robust discussion around what does it mean. I said, the professors didn't like this, but I said around us, I was like, you guys aren't going to like this, but the very definition of what it means to write is going to change because you're going to be writing it with a coach. And it's not going to be like you literally have a coach. It's just Microsoft Word is going to evolve to a point that you're going to get coached on writing better while you're writing. And is that any different than the writing that someone else did before these tools were there? Or is it cheating? Or is it just that writing has evolved? And I would argue that it's the latter. And you guys are going to need to adapt your grading methodology, your testing methodology to make sure that you're pivoting in a way that you're assessing the skills, not based on what the tool set was 5 years ago, but what the tool set is today. And I think that that's a journey that every industry is going to need to take of, all right, these tools are here. How are we adapting our models for how work is evolving with the introduction of these tools? And there are going to be mistakes made. There are going to be things that people's, like, I think the example of the apprentice level of skill sets and those jobs, how do we get that knowledge base built? Because the direction we're going, that's a hole. And we're going to need to figure that out as we go.
Well, thank you for your part in growing the knowledge base of the industry collectively and looking at the clock. I'd say we have to pivot towards the end of the podcast. Thank you very much, David Kelly, for sharing that, for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Hack facts.
It was exciting to see an awards theatre on the exhibition floor celebrating winners of the Learning Technology Awards. When you go to those award ceremonies, you very rarely find out exactly what those programs are about that win awards. I collared Professor Jerome Pereira, a consultant oncoplastic breast surgeon at James Paget University Hospital NHS Foundation Trust and an honorary professor at the University of East Anglia. He leads international training programs in breast care and has pioneered research in surgical outcomes and leprosy. Important work. We discussed his award-winning surgical training program, blending digital learning with evidence-based decision-making to raise global standards in breast cancer care and transform surgical education in the NHS and beyond. So it's great to have you on the podcast. Welcome to the Learning Hack.
Thank you, John.
Professor Pereira, am I pronouncing that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Pereira? Professor Pereira, how did it feel to win the award?
It was really a very, very special moment, especially as I had my team around me.
Yeah.
You know, I've been very, very fortunate to work with such a talented group of people. So the 12 of my core team were there to celebrate, and it was a celebration primarily for everyone.
Yeah.
It was actually, considering it's been 15 years working, but we have been fortunate that this is our 6th international award.
Wow.
Yeah, this is our 6th international award.
Oh.
Yes, but this is a special one.
It's a special one.
Yes.
Good to hear that. And how do you think it will benefit your future work in healthcare?
I think it does raise the, quality is very, very important, and learning technologies have got such an amazing reputation for quality. And to be recognized by this particular group will, again, it's a hallmark of quality in everything we do. And we do certainly put it on our website and other programs. We do that. So, it just helps to raise the profile and also give confidence to our users,
okay,
potential users.
Okay. So focusing on the actual award itself and the piece of work that it focuses on, what's the problem that this training was designed to fix? I realise, the whole thing has a much more interesting story that we'll get into, but just in that limited sense, what was the problem that this training was fixing?
Yeah, the challenge was that there's a variation in outcomes among surgeons.
Yeah.
Even to this day. Yeah. Even though United Kingdom has got a very good training program, despite the best efforts, I think the training could always be improved. And I think it's always, even I'm not saying we've got the best training program, but I'm obviously biased.
Yeah.
So I feel that there are so many advances going on in breast cancer management. Not only in breast cancer management in terms of the oncology, but also in surgery. Yeah. And even for instance, mastectomy now is really should not be considered a good option. If we can avoid a mastectomy, there is evidence to show that a patient undergoing a breast conserving surgery and radiotherapy, the survival is better. This is on a large meta-analysis of, I think, approximately 1.6 million patients. Yeah. So things are happening very quickly, and therefore, because breast cancer work is quite evidence-based work, we need a mechanism to get this evidence across continually.
Yes.
You need a platform because the evidence is fast-moving, and we need to, bring about this behavioral change. People need to be convinced because there's no doubt that all human beings have biases. Surgeons have got a special bias saying, the common thing would be in my hands, this works very well. But actually, we can't go by that. We need to be more and more scientific. And we are largely scientific, but we can always be challenged to take the science more seriously and make it more evidence-based in our practice.
Okay. So can you describe the nature of the solution which you won the award? What's the design process? How was it implemented?
Okay. So because we were trying to address the challenges of educating surgeons in training and consultant surgeons who are in full-time work, we had to find a mechanism that makes education and training accessible, flexible, and learner-centered. So that's the reason we chose the Moodle platform. And we've been using this platform for the last 15 years. Secondly, we wanted to make sure that the evidence-based information, I'm going to start that here. We had to make sure that the evidence-based knowledge that they gain is applicable into day-to-day practice. That's vitally important. And therefore, we put in, throughout our courses, decision-making tests and methods of assessing the quality of decision-making and regular feedback from experts in the field for our students. Therefore, so two things, access and also the in-depth learning that promotes good decision-making. That's central to everything we do.
Okay. And how did you balance the digital and face-to-face parts of the solution?
Yeah. Initially, when we started our courses, we gave 16 weeks of education for a single module, 16 weeks. And then we met our students, usually those days we used to meet them at the Royal College of Surgeons in London. Yeah. Spent a whole day with them, getting feedback from the previous 16 weeks of education, and then introducing the next 16 weeks of education by multiple lectures, workshops, etc. That was the way we operated initially. But then we found students from Australia and other parts of the world traveling just for a day.
Right.
So just for this, and we felt that's not fair.
Yeah.
So we've got two methods of education now. We have the Master of Surgery in Oncoplastic Breast Surgery, which is aimed at our UK market and the European market, purely because of essentially the travel issue.
Yes.
And then for students from the Indian subcontinent and other parts of the world, we have this pure online course, but that is augmented by workshops done in different parts of the world. So the students could fly into those areas, spend a weekend, 3 or 4 days. We demonstrate live operations, we do cadaveric operations, we do planning with patients, etc. So, and also students bring their video recordings of their own operations. We advise them, we critique it, etc. So it is a different kind of a process, but it's very important that this blended aspect goes hand in hand with the online.
And the quality of the learning is just as good in digital as face-to-face, because this has very often been the complaint of learners that, I'm getting fobbed off with an e-learning course.
Yes, yeah. We had to do a lot of work with the university, because the university had to recognize that the UK model is as good and robust as the online model, and it has been through a number of processes.
Yeah,
and we've been running now both models for the last 7 years.
Yeah,
and we can't see any difference. I mean, for instance, we can compare the written work is exactly the same. You know, the summative papers that the UK candidates submit are no different in terms of quality to the overseas students. And we don't even know whom we're marking, because they're all engaging on the same platform.
Yes.
So they do not know the difference. We examiners do not know the difference.
Yeah.
So there is, for some reason, it is working. And, that's the reason. This feedback, you've seen this feedback from 350 students. And they're a combination of both. They're a combination of the UK master's group and the overseas group.
Yeah.
And they're similar in terms of the feedback, the confidence levels, the knowledge base, etc.
Let's make you wonder why, given that result, you would still continue having so much face-to-face in the closer to home situation, because it's more expensive to deliver.
Yeah, I think they do like the contact with the tutors.
Yeah.
It is one of the earliest successes we had with the face-to-face program has been the fact that they could engage, they could connect with these big names in surgery.
Yeah.
Now, having said this, John, recently we have reduced our face-to-face quite significantly after COVID, even for the UK graduates now.
Yes, that happened.
After COVID, we have reduced it, and we are now we're looking at it again. How should we proceed with this? Because we have done examinations. We have got these clinical structured examinations. So we have got a number of stations where the surgical trainees are assessed in terms of communication skills, planning for operations, how do you deal with complications, etc. And also one station, which is a logbook station, where they will demonstrate, show the videos of the operations, etc. And we question them. During COVID, we took this program purely online, made it online, and it works as effectively.
Yes.
So it may be the level of motivation of our students. That's the other thing. You don't forget, these are motivated learners.
Yeah.
They're surgeons in training who have a goal.
Yes.
They're by nature quite ambitious people. They are goal orientated.
Yeah.
So it may be that is a selected population that we're dealing with.
Yes. And of course, this is one area, if we compare this to other areas of learning and training, this is one area where it's absolutely critical that the training works. Otherwise, the impact on, my wife has breast cancer. I see these things from the patient end.
Yes.
You want to know that you trust that person.
Absolutely. And I really feel humbled to know the impact of our courses doing, the guys in this country now, alumni, are leaders in the field of breast cancer.
Yeah.
Whether you take it Imperial College or Cambridge, Edinburgh, all these units, it's our students now who are now leading the programs there.
I'd like to talk a bit more about the impact, but first of all, on the subject, how have you seen the digital capabilities open to you developing over the last few years? Because the face-to-face stuff, it doesn't really change. It's kind of been very static for maybe hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Right? But the quality of that, but the digital stuff comes on very quickly.
Yes, yeah.
I haven't seen that.
It's a very interesting one, John. I keep an eye on what's happening in the AI world and newer technologies, robotics, etc. But we as a group have decided that we want to use low fidelity technology purely because we are more concerned about reach.
Right.
Okay, we want our students in Africa or Zimbabwe, Uganda, or in Australia or Melbourne for them to have access. So if we use too complex technologies, we may lose the access part of it.
Yeah.
So we've limited ourselves and we have we use 3D technologies, which is very good, especially for training in human factors. Right. We have do filming of how to manage an emergency in the theater setting.
Yes.
And then and where things went wrong, and then we show the film of the proper way of doing things. So we use this kind of technology, 3D technologies. We use technologies for laparoscopic surgery, decision making. So where you got good, definition of the organs, etc. So, for instance, a patient undergoing appendicectomy. Yeah. The junior trainee puts a scope in, but can't find the appendix.
Yes.
And what do you do next? So he chooses an option, does it, and still can't find the appendix. Okay? He calls the boss in. The boss dissects all the area and finds out there's no appendix because the patient had a previous appendicectomy. They didn't take the history properly.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? So we have got different kinds of human factor scenarios, technical problems, technical decision making. So, for instance, I have got a proposal for improving endoscopy training in this country.
Right.
Okay, and I have been in dialogue with senior gastroenterologists in the country, and it's a definite progress if we can get it off the ground. But people are. They are reticent to change, but I know I don't want to give the too much of the information away, but because it is actually definitely a way forward in improving endoscopy training, fast-tracking endoscopy training.
Marvelous. So can we talk about the impact of the program and how you've measured it? Because I saw the talk you were giving just now, the old Kirkpatrick levels, 1 to 4 coming in.
Yes. Yeah. I think we employed a research fellow for a year, and he looked at all our programs with anatomical detail.
Yeah.
Okay, and sent questionnaires out to all our candidates, all the students who undertook our courses for the previous 3 years.
Yeah.
And the things that came out were increased confidence levels in managing breast conditions.
Yeah.
There has definite impact on their career progression.
Mm-hmm.
Their increasing use of breast conserving surgery and oncoplastic operations, reduced mastectomy rates, confidence in running research projects, impact upon their services, because our clinical management and leadership program insists that each student has to come up with a quality improvement project. And for instance, the quality improvement project would be, I want to develop a brand new breast unit in my hospital, a specialist breast unit in my hospital.
Right.
And they've done it. Yeah, they've done in Maldives, in India, new breast units, specialist breast units started by our students.
Wow.
So these are real impact factors.
Yeah,
so it's...
that goes way beyond...
Yeah, well beyond...
might expect.
Absolutely.
Yes. So what's been the impact of this in the UK, where your work's based, although, it's kind of global in impact? In the context of a slightly beleaguered NHS, certainly cash-strapped, that's struggling to leverage digital technology to create efficiencies. And then maybe you could talk about what you're doing in the wider world as well, but particularly in the UK context. So,
yes, it has been a bit of a struggle for our students, purely because the allowance for their, to pay for courses, etc., there are financial difficulties, and therefore we have kept our rates very low. We are probably the cheapest master's degree program in the country. Yes, we kept it, and it has never been a commercial venture. It's always been, so that's important. So despite that, we still get a good number from the UK, and the UK students feel that because the course has established such a reputation, it's well known. You go to any breast unit in this country and ask them, or a student goes with the saying that I've got my master's oncoplastic breast surgery from the University of East Anglia. Everybody knows about it. It's quality, and also gets them good, gets them into good jobs. So these are trained as leaders. These guys who go through courses. So they are impacting. Many of them are at the forefront of research in this country, forefront of running education training courses. Many of them are come onto own faculty as teachers and trainers doing on the master's faculty. So that is the impact these guys are having in their own practice and on the surrounding units they are in. But with regards to the UK government, and I know that we are living in a very, very challenging climate financially, and though blended learning is coming out in patches in certain areas, I have got concerns about the quality.
Yeah,
I have serious concern because many a time blended learning equates putting a few slides, PowerPoint slides, and some unstructured text which has no educational principles behind it.
Yeah,
I should have mentioned to you, John, one of the reasons I feel that we are so successful is every aspect of our education is underpinned by adult education theory, whether small group learning or assessments or decision making, everything is underpinned by education theory.
Yeah.
And this is lacking in most of the education programs that are going across the NHS. And I therefore feel very passionately that they need to be looking at more in depth at not only myself or our group, but other groups who are producing quality blended learning, which I believe is better than traditional methods of education. Yeah. There are meta-analysis out there showing that actually blended learning is equivalent or even better. Our experience over the last 15 years is definitely better. It's cheaper, high level of education, and because of the flexibility. Do you know there was the NETS, which is the National Education Training Survey, looked at the NHS workforce and their views and satisfaction rates on the education programs. Despite the fact the government is spending £4 billion a year on this education training and upskilling of the workforce,
right,
1/3 of the staff, approximately 1/3 of the staff, feel dissatisfied with the training. And why? Lack of access, poor education, they're too busy at their work to leave their shifts. All this could be addressed by blended learning.
Yes. Well, that's really interesting. And to talk about the global dimension, because one of the great things about using blended learning, and as you mentioned, it's the fact that it's more portable beyond the kind of regional borders to other parts of the world. What impact has your work had in other parts of the world?
Yes. So initially, in the early years, it was mainly Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah.
And they came on board, and then India came on board.
Mm-hmm.
Large cohort. We have got a regional convener in India who covers Southeast Asia area. And so initially it was that. But over the last 5 years, I've been working a lot in Africa because I'm quite passionate to try and find solutions. And we, as a city, we have trained 100 nurses now, more than 100 in the last 3 years, free training.
Right.
As specialist nurses doing our programs. We have given 5 free mastership places to deserving surgeons from Africa, from Zimbabwe, from Kenya, from Uganda. So all these countries, it's a competitive bursary that goes to the Association of Breast Surgery. They apply to the Association of Breast Surgery, and the best candidate gets a free space on our program, £9,000 worth of free course. So essentially, we got to work very carefully because there are challenges. People don't have access to technology and poor connectivity. So we are having to
point at my 5-year-old iPad when you've met this technology. Sorry, that's right.
But the thing that encourages me is if this type of education could be taken up by nurses and doctors in places like India and Africa, why not it be taken up by the NHS?
Yeah.
more effectively.
Can we also talk about how this all began for you, how you got involved in learning and how that led on to what you're doing currently?
Yeah, okay.
You were a jobbing surgeon.
Yes, I was a jobbing surgeon. I was a district general. I'm a district general hospital surgeon. So I got into the learning primarily from the outcomes of the national audit, which I had the fortune to lead, the National Mastectomy and Reconstruction Audit, which is a prospective study of 18,000 patients undergoing mastectomies and reconstruction in the UK.
Study.
Yeah, at that time it was the largest study in the world, and I found immediately the first report gross differences in outcomes between some surgeons had very good results and others not very good results. So I said, this is a training issue, and that's the reason I got into it. But before that, I got into undergraduate education because we were developing a medical school at Norwich, and I connected with Professor Sam Leinster, who was an excellent educator, medical educationalist, who to this day is my co-director in all this. And so I became very interested in undergraduate education, and I saw the impact of problem-based learning.
Yeah.
I think it's a good way of learning, especially in the postgraduate setting where, real-life problems could be brought to a forum and the trainees discuss how to deal with the issues and bring in the latest of evidence, critique the literature, and critique each other's posts, and then be guided by expert tutors. So that kind of process I saw firsthand in undergraduate education. Yeah. But it was in the undergraduate setting, it's all happens in a couple of hours.
Right.
But here we felt, because these surgeons are working surgeons, we need to give them time to discuss, but not realizing, but actually this time was beneficial for in-depth learning because it produces reflective learning.
Yes.
You just, so if you're sitting in a group and discuss, you don't have time to reflect. But here, the guys are going into the literature, coming back and putting posts and, critiquing each other's posts. So it's a much more in-depth education.
Right.
And so, and then we started finding new things because we developed this based on our experience in medical school and the graduate curriculum. We took it to a different level to the postgraduates and found it works extremely well. Yeah. So then I got more and more interested in looking at decision-making, and then I started looking at decision-making, interoperative decision-making. Everything is, decision-making is the crux of everything you do. Whether you decide to walk across the road, when there's no bus or there's a bus in front of you, or you make the decision to move your instrument into that area of the anatomy, which actually has got a blood vessel,
Yeah.
It's all decision-making. And decision-making, when to operate, when not to operate, when to tell a patient, this is the time to go for this aspect of the management, all that is decision-making.
Yeah. So some people might think it's only kind of in diagnosis that it comes in. This is something that people talk a lot about with AI, particularly how great it is diagnosis. Yeah. But decision-making is a part of what you do as a medical professional all the time.
And the decision-making we make, many of the decisions are made with incomplete information.
Yeah.
There are so-called gray areas of clinical practice, which I would say majority of the times is gray area. It's not, diseases can present, certain diseases can present very, very clearly. Okay, somebody presenting with breast cancer, overt breast cancer.
Yeah.
You know that. And medical students could, once they see a diagnosis of breast cancer, they can do it immediately. They'll diagnose it the next time. But when there's subtle presentation of breast cancer, a patient presenting with absolutely no symptoms, just a bit of calcium in the breast, what do you do with that calcium? Do we biopsy it? Is it a healthy person who's come with breast pain? All those kinds of decision-making that goes on, balancing the risks versus the damage to the patient, etc. These are all subtle decisions that are being made. And we want our candidates to make the safest decision, but also the appropriate decision for the patient.
Yeah.
So it's it's quite a subtle thing, that decision making, and very vitally important.
And is it very specific to the practice area, or does it draw on perhaps a more general cognitive development.
Yes, there are. That's the reason why you may have seen a test called the script concordance test that we deploy to train and test decision making.
Yeah.
So the understanding of script concordance script is that we got strips of knowledge and experience in our brain. Okay, so when we see a certain situation, there is this cognitive process work at those bits of previous information come together.
Yeah.
With the new information. Okay, and then you make a decision on that.
Right.
But sometimes the decision you make has to be altered because some other factor comes into the equation. For instance, you might have seen a patient, a 35-year-old patient, who is you just diagnosed breast cancer. And you planned a certain mode of treatment for her.
Yeah.
And then she rings you 2 weeks later and says, by the way, I'm pregnant. Okay?
Yeah.
So, what do you do then? So, this script concordance test gives you 5 responses. No change. Okay? Proceed as previously planned, except 5 changes. Or treatment totally contraindicated, supported, etc. We got 5 responses.
Right.
And then the student will tick a response, and then their response is compared to that of 10 experts in the field who answer that question. That is the reason why our courses are so successful.
Yeah.
Because we train and we test their decision-making skills throughout the program.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah. And then the second week, they're given a much more complex case to discuss. And they apply what they learned in the first week, all the evidence-based knowledge, on a very standard case, and they apply this all onto a complex case.
Yeah.
And at the end of the week, they've got to give us an answer in 250 words saying, this is what I will do with this patient.
Yeah.
So they've got to commit to a decision. So I believe that's one of the reasons why we're so successful in our specialist community.
Now, I've been holding myself back because so much of what you're saying kind of fringes on learning theory. And so I have another podcast, Great Minds on Learning, and I'm holding myself back from plugging it. But it is fantastic to hear you talk about this with such passion and inspiring. And as I said, I have worked with breast cancer.
Yes.
I know in my bones, and certainly in hers, how important and vital it is, the work that you're doing. And I think I want to say thank you for that. And thank you also for taking the time to do the interview today.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Enjoyed speaking to you.
Thanks.
Hack facts.
Sophie Costin is an experienced learning consultant and digital learning designer at Make Real, who gave us our first guest on this podcast 5 years ago. She specializes in creating immersive learning experiences, combining creative design with educational technology to enhance learner engagement. They also work with AI. With all the talk about innovative AI startups disrupting established players in the LearnTech space, I wanted to talk to somebody from that world and find out how true that picture is for smaller companies. Sophie shared a grounded view from the startup frontline. She told me how legacy policies and infrastructure in large organizations often block innovation, and why small-scale experimentation is crucial for genuine transformation in learning. Sophie, welcome back to the Learning Hack.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very kind of off-the-cuff interview because you were saying something very interesting in a chat we're having. I've had to talk to a lot of people, I suppose the kind of broad brush type of commentators about analysts and so on about AI, and I've heard a lot of messages from the conference platform that the vendor market is in for a shake-up, but it's about to become a very interesting place because all the innovative new AI startups are coming on, much smaller companies, and that threatens the position of the big incumbent platform companies. We all know their names, with big LMS solutions who are bolting on AI quite furiously, but the smaller, more fleet of foot startups who kind of have it in their bones will disrupt them. And people are saying that this means that there's going to kind of be a bit of a turnaround, a bit of a shakeout in the market. But actually, I've talked to people who actually are in the smaller companies doing innovative AI-based and AI-adjacent stuff like yourself, and the picture is very different. Do you want to kind of tell me what your experience
was? Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's all right and correct. But I think there is this elephant in the room, which is that, there's this real desire within L&D to be innovative and to do things differently and to embrace that shake-up. But actually we exist in a wider ecosystem, which means that we have to comply with policies that are company-wide. So, info security policies, data policies, various sort of security policies that we can't circumnavigate, whereas actually all those incumbent platforms are quite well positioned to have the right sort of ISO accreditation to look safe, and so to just kind of sneak in there. I think we kind of saw that in a really boring example, but in the pandemic, we were all starting to meet in all these interesting places like alt space and the metaverse. And it was like, what are we going to do in the future? And then the answer was Teams. And Teams snuck in there not because it's the best solution, but because it was already whitelisted and it was the easiest solution and the safest solution.
Whitelisted meaning?
That it was signed off by IT security teams, that it met the standards of the company processes. And it feels like we're in danger of, for want of a better word, not to add to the doom and gloom that has maybe sort of undertoned today. But there is that sort of risk of just doing the safest thing, which isn't the most innovative thing.
Yeah. Because I think at these conferences, I come across a lot of people who are similar vintage to me. And we went through, I was talking to Josh Bersin earlier today, we went through the initial big change of the internet coming into it and everything getting digitized and getting online. And that exciting buzz of the market that then turned into something different. And there's kind of a feeling amongst people of my cohort, I suppose, it's back to the good old days of small, innovative, fast-moving companies, startups, shaking up things a bit. Because, to be honest, the learning tech market in the last 5 or so years has been a bit dull. But it's different now because there are these big incumbents. I mean, the companies are far bigger, and you only have to look around at the size of the stands nowadays. In my days, it was all shell scheme, as we say. And how does that dynamic play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things there. I think one, platforms aren't particularly right for now. Like, platforms are right for scaling. Like, when you're ready to go into business as usual mode with your AI solution, whatever that solution is, then that's when a platform is the right tool for you. And then before that, it's all about finding out, what does good look like? How is this actually going to optimize the way we work? And so small startups and little agile pieces that you can experiment with are the right thing. But I think we are currently hitting a blocker that when you make the business case with the experimentation, trying to take it forward to the next step is actually a business-wide problem, not just an L&D problem. So I think it's a lot about engaging stakeholders early on, but it's easier said than done, no doubt. Like, you can't hand wave that level of challenge away. I mean, we're looking at, potentially a client-side LLM. Like, can we do this client-side so that those concerns are alleviated? There's various technical challenges, but there's also various stakeholder engagement connection solutions as well.
So how does this work out in practical terms? That in very simple language, you work with the client to come up with a solution, then you try to actually implement it in-house, and what do you run up against there?
So it's all the data security team questionnaires and that level of policy. And a lot of this is legacy policy, right? So, having an open internet connection is just an out-and-out no for most large, especially financial, highly regulated companies.
And does AI ring those 2 letters, does that ring a particular warning bell as well?
It certainly has done in the past. I think the level of AI policy within companies is evolving, but there was a time about sort of a year ago, 18 months ago, there just seemed to be a blanket we're not using it outside of Copilot. So that's the sort of safety, the circle, the MS circle of trust that we're currently operating in.
And why isn't this a problem for larger companies necessarily?
Larger companies in what way in terms of?
Well, say you're a big LMS supplier and you've got a big implementation in the company. You seem to be saying that they don't necessarily have the same kind of data problems.
Yeah.
Sort of walled garden.
Yeah, well, exactly that. I think my understanding is, they've got a single sign-on, a single point of entry for that kind of thing. They've got their own servers. It's already been signed off and ISO accredited. So, they're sort of a trusted partner in that respect. But it's when you don't have that level of IT infrastructure at a company that it starts to then ring alarm bells and sort of get blocked that way.
So what needs to happen to make that situation better, both from the vendor side and from the client side? Maybe two different questions there. You can answer them any order you like.
Well, I guess better, let's unpick that. I think if we rush to implement, the big legacy platforms will have a solution and we can implement them nice and easily with very few sort of blockers and barriers along the way. But then are we actually implementing the right thing? We'll just be taking on a solution because it's the easiest route. So actually, I think now is the time for experimentation, to do small-scale experiments, which then shouldn't get blocked by IT teams because you're not trying to roll out at scale. So, we're still building the roadmap now. I think it's important not to try and solve 10 problems down the road. You've got to have a good understanding of actually what are we trying to do with AI? Where are the affordances? What are the actual benefits? And you can play around with that in quite a small scale way without sort of triggering the barriers that come from trying to do something company wide, something that contravenes company policy. So that's the strategic mindset that I think we need. But then 3 steps down the road, what is the answer? Maybe it is a client-side LLM. Maybe it's that bigger platforms will start to implement more innovative ways of using AI, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? What I said just make any sense?
I think so. I think what you're saying is it's that there are problems and hiccups along that road, and people have to kind of be aware of that. Perhaps it's easier for the bigger companies because they already have a lot of stuff kind of white-listed or whatever it was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, they already have technical infrastructure, so they can do what they've always done with an AI plugin. So it's like, let's do what we've always done plus. But actually, if we take a step back and start to experiment and innovate on a small scale, if you were to try and roll out those small scale experiments now within a company, you'll get blocked, I think, very quickly in most instances because of company-wide policies. But I think we need to be brave and not worry about that. And we still need to experiment and see what good really looks like to build that business case and then to go, okay, how are we going to implement this?
Yeah.
And understand that then interacts with company-wide policies and we don't just exist in our own little L&D bubble. But I think let's try and not get scared by that blocker down the road. Let's really work out what good looks like first and then solve that problem.
Yeah. So if you're would be a client from your point of view, you're an innovative head of L&D in a large company and you want to try something really innovative and something new, and you want to go to a smaller provider, work with them to come up with something that's like AI driven and you feel is going to give massive benefits. You have to factor into it that there are going to be problems internally perhaps with blockers, and it's about talking to your kind of internal partners and talking to the business and so on and getting that right.
Yeah, no, it is. And, understanding that actually maybe the best case scenario isn't going to be possible right now, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't explore where we can and find out exactly what is going to add. What is this performance support? A lot of people today have been talking about the death of courses, and actually it's all about performance support.
Yeah.
But if we go with the easiest solution, all the sort of legacy platforms and tools that now have quicker ways, more efficient ways of doing the things we've always done.
Right. So
it's ideal, and I know we don't always live in an ideal world, but just to pause and experiment and to do things much more small scale and bespoke, and then start to take on the challenges of okay, how do I not circumnavigate, but how do I work with the rest of the company to get this implemented?
Yeah, we can't always go round those blockers. Sometimes you have to kind of deal with them head on, as it were. So, I mean, that is a kind of, it's a counsel there, not a counsel of despair, but, you know, let's kind of be realistic and grown up about this. If you want to get our kind of opportunity juices running, as it were, for what can be done, do you want to talk a little bit about the thing you won the award for with the stock exchange and what that solution was? And
yeah, I mean, that was, I sort of spoke about it a bit earlier today, that didn't have any grand technical innovation in it. You know, that was going back to basics and what good looks like in terms of storytelling, a compelling story, actually something that was really practical and useful for the learner. And I think that's actually a really good example of what we should be doing with AI instead of rushing towards the most technically complex solution we can think of. Actually go back to basics and look at the problems that we have in an organisation and say, how can I solve this? If this was magic, what would it be? And that's a question that Amazon used back in the early days. If Amazon was magic, what would it be? Yeah. And it's something that's been a bit of a North Star for me recently. Yeah. And sometimes if it's magic, it's AI and it's the bleeding edge of technology. And sometimes if it's magic, it's just a story told well that changes people's behaviour. And that's what the London Stock Exchange Group example was.
Interesting stuff and interesting projects that you're working on. And thank you for sharing that insight with us.
Welcome.
Hack Facts.
Regular fixture of the conference now is the 30 Under 30 programme, and I always want to speak to one of these representatives of L&D's future. Rising star Tadelayo Sodipe is an instructional designer at Suez, the Recycling, Recovery and Waste Management Group. He shared his journey into learning design, his work at Suez, and why optimism, creativity and inclusive values matter more now than ever in the age of AI and digital transformation. So, Tade, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So, you're in the 30 Under 30 program. We had the 30 Under 30 last year that we interviewed, and she's now in the conference. So, Melios is what's going to happen. So, but what did it mean to you to be included in the 30 Under 30 program?
I think it was a big deal for me, especially someone that suffers from imposter syndrome. Yeah. So just getting that recognition, like, whoa, you're actually, good enough to be part of this cohort. It gave me like a boost of self-esteem and confidence. And it's another feather to my hat, I say. Yeah.
And what was can you give us the story of how you got to this place? What's been your kind of journey? What have you been doing for work?
So, so how I got to the learning tech space. So I went to university and I studied art and design. I've always been good at art and design.
Which university?
Bedfordshire University. So I was in the Luton campus. I studied art and design. I fell in love with graphic designing and painting. And coming out of university, there wasn't much jobs that were kind of giving me opportunities to be a graphic designer or artist. So I took a little bit of time out. I went to Camp America. Yeah. And I taught kids arts and crafts in camp settings. And I really fell in love with like working with kids. It's kind of like weird the way this is going, but I fell in love with working with kids and really rewarding. And I continued working with kids when I got back into the UK. I worked as teaching assistant. I worked as teaching kids as well. And then I stepped into like the care setting. I worked with kids with autism and learning difficulties.
Yeah.
And then lockdown hit. And then when lockdown hit, these kids I was working with had to still pass their exams. I still had to do classwork, but they couldn't go into class. So what I ended up doing was making learning fun for them. So I make bespoke PowerPoint slides or learning aids. And then someone see my work that I've been doing and like, you can get a job doing that. And I thought, really? And then, so I just tailored my CV around that, fixed up my LinkedIn, and then I started working in the learning tech space as a digital learning content developer. Yeah, kind of long-winded, but yeah.
No, it's an interesting progress. And so many people in this industry, when you actually kind of drill into it, they had an unusual path into it. Very few people, as we always say, went to school and said, well, I grew up, I'm going to be an instructional designer. It's kind of very rare. People come in through odd routes, and that does provide a lot of good inputs from all over the place to practice the thing. And where are you working at the moment?
So I work for a company called Suez.
So yeah, I was really confused by that because I immediately thought Canal.
Yeah. I mean, you're kind of on the right track. It is a French company.
Yeah.
So they manage, let's say, 33% of the waste in the UK.
Yeah.
They have sites all around the world doing different type of things, from incineration to renewable energy.
Yeah.
It's a very good company. Very sustainable company and very pleasant people to work for. Yeah.
And what kind of learning needs does their workforce have that you're dealing with?
So because they work in such a vast industry, there's loads of roles within that. From frontliners, people that actually make the business, I would say, at the heart of the company.
Yeah.
So people that manage the waste from people's houses. So you've got people that drive the waste trucks.
Yeah.
You've got people that work on the street, doing the street sweeping, to people in payroll, to people in the HR department, from people doing, the bidding, from the law side. There's loads of roles within that. So the learning needs are kind of tailored to them roles. So yeah, it's very vast. So recently I developed a course around the engineering side of it.
Yeah.
So the engineers have to get a qualification from the City Guild. Normally that's a face-to-face session. And my team were tasked with making it digital. So we put 10 modules, made it into a digital learning package. Yeah.
Interesting. So you got a real kind of spread of kind of high-vis occupational roles, would give it that name, and then you've got kind of engineers, lawyers, and all the rest of it as well. So it's a lot to deal with. But what are the kind of challenges that throws up in the development? Is it mostly content development you do?
Yeah, so mostly content. I do some facilitation. Yeah, so face-to-face training with some learning activities. I feel like some of the challenges that we face is probably a lot of challenges we face are situational. So trying to find a common approach to some of the frictions that we have, which targets all of these different issues.
Right.
So for instance, now we had a kind of controversial aspect of business where it's like banter.
Yeah.
So some people might not receive banter well, some people will. So to tackle that, we created a training or learning activity that they had incorporated good banter and what the company sees as good banter. And yeah, shouts out to Mark Stacey for getting that off the ground. But yeah.
Who's Mark Stacey?
He is my line manager.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Great stuff. Yeah, banter, very loaded word. It's just banter, darling.
Yeah,
seriously, yeah. So you have to deal with all those sorts of issues as well. So you're well into the world of L&D.
Yeah.
Which is kind of the cultural side of it as well. When you kind of look forward to what might be your next role, without saying anything that will upset your employers, I mean, how you kind of see your future developing?
So, thanks to my brilliant mentor, Jamie, shouts out Jamie, name dropping, I want something that is so similar to Suez. If it's not like Suez, I'm not really trying to hear it. Yeah, so they are very much inclusive. They're patient, and I would say they listen. So yeah, an employer that does that times 10, that they might listen to what they have to say, but until then, yeah.
So kind of inclusive, receptive,
employer.
Yeah, you feel that limits.
Yeah, it does. But at the same time, that's good. That's good. That means that if I know it's a choice there. Yeah. So if I do find anyone, that means it's the right choice.
Yeah. And do you think you would stay with designing content, or do you want to move on to other types of
teachable? I would say that I would love to stick in this aspect of designing. My dream is to be like a global lead, right, of designing, or global lead of learning content, and eventually become like a consultant for companies, and just come into a company, help them out with their online learning, and see the benefits of that straight away, and then onto the next one. That's kind of where I want to be in probably like 20-30 years time. But that answers your question.
You're that far ahead. And so, at this stage in the conversation, I've really got to bring up the dreaded inevitable 2 letters of AI. I was just, that's the my vintage. We were talking about being in sessions and watching. When they flag up that thing, the singularity on a slide, when you say, it's okay for us, we'll both be dead, but what about our kids? It's really about 20 years ahead. Looking at one of my previous interviewees, Daniel Hulme's prediction for the next 5-10 years, AI is going to play a big role. Already it is doing a lot of stuff that one would normally turn to a graphic designer for. So how do you think about those types of challenges to your skill set and the future development of that?
So a lot of people have been a bit pessimistic with when it comes to AI, and I'm more of a optimistic with it. I see it as a assistant on my shoulder that I can work with or work alongside with. So in terms of making designs, AI is not as good as people think it is. It's not as good as people think it is. It might get there in 5 years time, 5 to 10 years time, but it's not as good as what you think it is. So even if you were to use a prompt, there's certain aspects of it that you would need to design yourself. So it might get the words spelt wrong, or it might curve it into a pixelated version of what you want. So
I get too many fingers.
It's not AI. There's not AI to generate 500 track. So I feel like even with the assistance of AI, a human touch is needed. Especially in the design culture, because you wouldn't be able to get any type of design without the human first, without them making a prompt. And even after that prompt, it's never going to get the first judge and filter. So even if you needed someone to manage the AI designs, that's still a job within that. So I'm not really scared about stuff like that. So
it's weird. I mean, I think when you work with it, you do kind of see the shortcomings. My experience kind of generating imagery and graphics through AI is that it either nails it first time, or you can't say, well, no, I'd like it like that, but I'd like a little bit more. Because it just doesn't seem to wear that well, and perhaps it'll get better at that. The ways that it can output are improving all the time, but at certain moments quite iffy. But that could change very quickly.
It could change, especially if you get the premium ones that you have to pay for. I can see that being more of an option, but even then, you need a human to put the prompt in. So
absolutely. And when you're the global head of graphics, you'll be bringing people along into how to deal with it, and that'd be part of the mentoring role.
I do think there is an aspect of learning about AI. I seen this post on Instagram a few weeks ago of how children in China are getting lessons on AI from early ages. So maybe there is a kind of mandatory training that should be installed, where it's you learn about AI prompting, or how to utilize AI in the workplace. So,
but first you have to convince the teachers that
they should be not of it.
I kind of this have been around for a while. I remember going through this with Wikipedia, where teachers are saying, no, don't under any circumstances use Wikipedia because it gets everything all wrong. And then there was a research paper came out, showed that the biggest users of Wikipedia are teachers.
And
then after that, it was a bit. And also, it was no less, it wasn't perfect. It was no less crap than Encyclopedia Britannica. And you can imagine that that kind of cycle will repeat itself with AI.
It's the same thing, especially even with Google now. People used to Google, and it's Google that. Now it's let me AI that, let me ChatGPT that.
Yeah.
It's the same type of cycle, and yeah.
So, what's been your experience at the conference, the exhibition of the 30 Under 30 program, and what you've done? What's it opened up for you? What sort of experiences have you had that you wouldn't have had otherwise, do you think?
I've been to the Learning Tech conference as a normal, like,
as a punter.
Yeah, it's just as a passerby.
Yeah.
And experiencing now as a 30 Under 30 and seeing the difference is clear. I'm able to talk with the speakers, sit down and actually have a meaningful conversation and get insights into what they're actually talking about.
Whereas before, so it's like going be on the Velvet Road, where you're a VIP lounge or state to Nigel Pay
so like spending some quality time with them and like not just talking about professional stuff, but like personal stuff as well. Like, oh yeah, where do you like to go on holiday? Like I was talking to Nigel, Sicily, and he was talking about how he ate lemons for like 24 hours straight. And so it was very interesting, and it's an insight into their personality, because I feel like when it's the normal conference or when you're at a conference where it's like the expo, you don't really get that personal touch for them, and you don't really get an idea of what they are like personally. And when you get an idea of what they're like personally, you kind of understand their concepts a bit more. Like, oh wow, this is where that kind of thought kind of derived from, or that's where their theories kind of come from their life experiences.
Yeah.
And it adds another layer onto the stuff that you can get from this kind of experience. And being part of 30 Under 30, I was able to meet peers as well, people similar ages, similar backgrounds, similar experiences, and we were able to like bounce ideas off each other, but
compare and contrast.
Yeah. It's all a banter as well. Like there's a bit of banter there. So
good banter or bad banter?
We're still deciding. It's up for grabs.
Yeah, you'd had to hang out with the salespeople on the stands. Late at night in bars, which I used to do as head of marketing for years. That's where you get a lot of bad banter.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Where the bodies are buried. So
So
what advice would you give to people considering going into the 30 Under 30 program? Do it in the future. How to approach it? How should they approach it? Getting the most from it.
So getting the most from it, I would say, I don't know if they'll have it in the future, but right now they have an application. So when you're on the app, you can see all the talks. You can see the people that are having the talks. You can see the timing of the talks, and this allows you to structure the day. Yeah. So if you just take like probably 30 minutes in your day and just look at the stuff you're interested in, and then kind of bookmark it. Yeah. Say, oh wow, yeah, I would like to learn more about AI or instructional designing, or just like methodologies, and you can see it on the app. Yeah. And that allows you to structure your day. And even with the 30 Under 30, it's amazing because you now have like a lifelong connection with someone that you probably would have never met or never crossed paths with them ever. And there might be an industry where you want to step into or connect with, and just having that opportunity is amazing.
Yeah. Brilliant. And now you've been on the Learning Hack, I hope you'll stay in touch. And because when you start your podcast, I can come.
Or you think I'm good for podcasts?
Well, everyone's got a podcast.
Yeah. Okay, true.
But not to kind of run down your, technical abilities as a podcaster, but I'm sure it'd be really good.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, lastly, who has inspired you? Who do you follow? Not necessarily just in the L&D field, but as gurus, the outsiders as well. But and I'm really interested in this question because it's probably not the same old bunch of people that.
So there's a lot of people that I take inspiration from. There's a lot of people I take inspiration from. In terms of the instructional design space, there's a guy called Devlin Peck.
Yeah.
He is amazing. He's one of the first people that kind of show me that this is actually a job that I can do. Yeah. And he, not necessarily to say that he's not smart, but he dumbed it down to like a simple 10 slide thing or 20 slide thing. Yeah. It's like, this is what you need to do to produce successful e-learning.
Because there is a huge amount of theory.
Yeah.
A lot of podcasts, very much on learning.
Yeah. So in terms of the learning tech space, him as a person and what he's done and what he's achieved is amazing. So I look towards that when it comes to him. inspirations. Terms was personal. There's a few people, but some of my fictional characters actually. Yeah. So people like Rocky Balboa. Yeah, people like Rocky Balboa. Just like, doesn't matter how hard you get hit, it's about how you stand up. And yeah, obviously historical figures, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. So those, and obviously in the current stage I'm in right now, people like LeBron James, Will Smith, there's loads of people, Ashley Walters, there's loads. I'm being put on the spot right now, but yeah.
Is it anything for? Well, no, it's a interesting list.
Yeah, it's very diverse.
Yeah. And we're not only still allowed to be diverse, but we always will be diverse.
Yeah, 100%.
And that's the feeling I get from this industry, is they're not giving up on that in a hurry. Anyway, thank you for taking the time to stay. I'll let you get back to meeting.
I've got some questions for you as well.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So what inspired Learning Hack?
It's about the Learning Hack.
Yeah.
Well, I was head of marketing for years and I did thought leadership, because I worked in PR before and wrote a lot of blogs and stuff like that. And that led on to getting bored with writing white papers and blogs. And I just ran into somebody who's actually doing a print magazine about e-learning down there.
Oh, okay.
And we did a print magazine, 60-page magazine, which was really fun to do. Because I'd got a bit kind of burned out with doing the brochures.
Yeah, it happened in my papers.
And I really enjoyed the interviewing. So when that company got bought by a bigger company, then itself got bought by a bigger company, and I had a nice redundancy settlement. People said, "What are you going to do next?" We assume you're going to do podcasting. And it hadn't actually occurred to me, but I took it up because I just enjoyed kind of getting to talk to people, and that's now become a living.
That's amazing. If we love getting paid to do what you love, like.
Yeah, it is. It really is. And what I like about podcasting particularly, it's not really a broadcast medium, although I've got a bit of experience with that in the past. It's a networking medium. That's why there's that thing of, we were talking about earlier, podcasters go on each other's podcasts. You get to meet people from being a podcast guest. So it's a bit like a 30 under 30 program.
It's a 60 under 6. Yeah, it's kind of similar, but yeah.
But yeah, on that bombshell.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, SB.
And I'll see you on the conference platform next year, I think.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Hack Facts.
Donald H. Taylor, friend of the podcast, is a regular guest on this show. A prominent figure in learning and development, he serves as chair of the Learning Technologies Conference and lead researcher for the L&D Global Sentiment Survey. He is widely known for his insights into workplace learning trends and technologies. Wrapping up the conference, he reflected for me on seismic shifts in learning technologies, from AI-driven disruption and vendor dynamics to ethical dilemmas and equity concerns, offering insights from his decades at the industry's front line. Welcome to the podcast yet again.
Thank you very much.
It's been an interesting conference, a really good one, I think. General kind of highlights, or I would say highlights and lowlights, but there are no lowlights.
There are only highlights and limelights, the bright, brilliant moments which are there all to see.
And sort of humorous moments occasionally.
Well, the humorous moment for me was doing the session with Egla Vinauskaite when I was chairing it.
Yeah.
Egla was speaking, and we did this bit 20 minutes in. We thought, well, we're going to structure something to get some conversation going. We asked the audience a question, they discussed it, and we got a bit of feedback going. But while they were doing the discussion, we dropped the mics, as always. We dropped the sound on the mics so that we can talk to each other. But weirdly, the captioning, which was running automatically, kept going.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't putting up the captions of what we were saying, it was putting up the captions of something else. But what was it? It starts off with the line being something like, you flow like a feather.
Yeah.
Well, that's quite nice. There's a breeze in the sky or something, right? And then it's something like, I'm a bit creepy. And then it came up with, what the hell am I doing here? And at this stage, I thought, right, okay, well, obviously AI has become sentient. The automatic captioning is just talking to itself. Yeah. That's what it looked like. I motioned to the guys on the sound desk to cut off the captioning. We went back into the presentation. I was wondering if we were going to come out of the room and Skynet would be sentient and about to crush humanity. Yeah. Actually, what happened was they had just kept the thing going, but they were listening to a song themselves, and it was picking up the lyrics of the song on the sound desk and putting that into the caption.
Interesting. And hence the kind of James Joyce flow of consciousness.
Exactly. It was, when you're falling asleep and you hear something, like in a crowded place, and you hear something and your mind takes this babble and makes words out of it. Yeah, it was like that. Very James Joycean.
How strange. Yeah.
So that was a good laugh, if a bit concerning. And highlights. For me, the real highlight actually was probably the questions we got both days at the end of the keynotes, but particularly second day after Daniel Hume's keynote. And both keynotes featured AI heavily, but the questions we had today were really good at not focusing on detail. Right. Nobody asked the question, what large language model should I be using? It was, what are the ethical questions? What are the concerns about equity? How do we make sure that if we are moving towards a future where politics is transformed because nobody's sure what's true, how can we make sure that we have good politics in those situations? So there were really fundamental, meaty questions that it did my heart good to see people throwing up and having a good discussion about.
Yeah, that's interesting. I suppose the funny moment for me was a similar one, which may well end up in the tape, or I may edit it out. When I was interviewing Daniel Hume, I gave him a question. I'd used ChatGPT to compile the questions. And I asked him this question, which seemed perfectly reasonable to me, about something he'd said. And he said, I'd never said that. I have never used those two words.
Wow.
In a phrase. And we've just been talking about how ChatGPT tends to behave like a
drunken graduate.
Drunken graduate. I say, well, this may be an example of intoxication. But that kind of called me up for not checking out my sources.
I see, yes, that's the thing. And I use ChatGPT myself, I think, like a lot of people do. And particularly if I put a post on LinkedIn, very simple example, I will use ChatGPT to go through the responses you get on the comments, find the themes, which I've already got an idea of, but I will check and correct what ChatGPT says. And then I'll say, and now give illustrative quotes with names from the comments for each of these things. 9 out of 10 of those quotes are accurate. The 10th one might be completely made up. Yeah. So you have to go through and check everything.
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? And that it's come up as a thing where I think what you see is a slide that kind of says, all right, 30% right, 60% right, and still like 40% bollocks. And as the graph moves up, those mistakes disappear. And I just wonder if they will, or if we're always going to be dealing with the kind of extremely clever but only kind of 80% right technology.
I would be amazed if any technology can give a 100% accurate answer to any non-trivial question. So Excel will tell you 2 times 2 is 4. But if you're asking a deeper question about something, there will be nuance behind it. And if you're asking it to search through, and this is what we tend to use GPT for, search through a collection of data in order to pick out some illustrative things, such as a quote somebody said, I don't think you can ever be sure that it's ever going to be 100% accurate, which means there's always have to be testing. Now, if you look at how transcripts were done in the past, there would always be errors in them.
Yeah.
The way to find the error in a transcript is to find a very cheap place to do your transcripts and have it done twice. Oh. Then you compare transcript A with transcript B, and then you find the errors, because it's very unlikely the same error is made twice.
Right. Okay.
Now, I'm not sure if the same thing could be done with ChatGPT, but possibly if you're using either the same language model with different prompting or two different large language models, you may be able to do something similar to check one set of answers against another. The trouble is, the answers are never, they are always going to change because of the nature of how the algorithms work. That's the problem. So I think it takes probably a systematic approach to testing. You may need to run the same thing through more than one model several times in order to come up with, if you like, a mean of the different possible answers.
Right, okay.
That makes sense?
It is. It's interesting, and it's more detailed than I expected to get at this late stage of the conference.
I've had a cup of tea and a Bakewell tart, which has fueled me.
Amazing. Well, yeah. That's what we should all have, I think. Yeah. Pulling back a bit, though, you also do the GSS survey, which we featured in the past on the podcast, what's hot in e-learning. And, of course, at a conference like this, you pick up the sense of what the vibe is, what people think is hot, what's important. Have you found any kind of parallax between those two sources that you're both very close to this year, or are they kind of roughly in alignment, or
They're in alignment, and I'll tell you what's really interesting is that in the survey for last year, 2024, for lots of reasons that I won't go into, it was quite clear there had been what I call an AI shock.
Yeah,
there was an absolute sense that people were like a deer in the headlights, that the only thing that mattered for good and ill was AI. It was the most popular thing by far. It was also the greatest challenge. And there were other things associated with that, perhaps skilling, personalization and so on were heavily backed. But AI was the thing that was driving the sense that everything had changed and everything else became less important. Now, this year, it's true that AI is still important in people's minds, but it's also true that other things have been recovering. So internationally, the sense of value being important has recovered. And in each country, the thing that is what that country is traditionally voted for has become more important. So it's like things have reverted back to the mean, back to what was important before we had this AI shock last year. Now, looking around the conference and the exhibition last year and this year, I see that same reflection that last year there was that rabbit in the headlight view that AI is everywhere and we're not sure what to do about it, but we're going to talk about it. This year, there's far more detail about what AI means. There's also consensus about the degree of change it's going to bring, which is large, the sense that's going to go on for a period of time, which is long, and the view that L&D therefore has to change quite significantly in order to remain relevant.
I think Danny Johnson put it in rather more extreme terms than that and said that it's make or break for L&D.
Yeah, should
do you think that is too pushing the envelope too far towards the whirlpool of helpless panic, away from the kind of rocks of complacency? Or do you think she's about right on that?
I think she's about right. And I think we have, more than 13 years ago, I was talking about the training ghetto, the sense that there is a place where training departments shrink towards if they don't change fast enough, which is physically shown by being in the basement or being in some outbuilding, right, a place different from the rest of the business. It's a ghetto because nobody else wants to go there, and people sort of talk a different language there. If you get more involved with the business and you change your operating model and you become more open, you shift out of the ghetto and into a place of change where you're working with the business. 13 years ago, this was apparent because of some technological changes, but also other things that meant that increasingly training and learning could be supported outside of L&D by parts of the organisation that were not associated with learning at all. So sales, operations, whatever, could do their own learning.
All right.
That is so much more the case today. So if you've got somebody who's interested in making sure that sales teams are talking to each other properly and sharing good stuff so everyone can work more efficiently, I think it's quite unlikely that your sales director is going to go to the L&D department and get that fixed. They're more likely to just set up a some form of internal communication supported by AI in some way, and they may go on to expand and develop that. But it's unlikely they'll do that at the moment with the help of the L&D department, even though it's absolutely about learning and absolutely about increasing your performance. L&D isn't seen as being the provider of that.
No. Coming back to the subject dear to my heart, the vendor market.
Yes.
It's quite interesting, but Josh Bersin was talking about this as well, the kind of contrast between the, born AI companies and the bolt-on bigger companies and so on. And people I've been talking to in those smaller companies do point out, what a risk it is, what a leap of faith for the clients often, because they're going to have a lot of problems internally over data access. As soon as you mention AI to your IT department, in some cases, it's going to be a kind of lockdown. Whereas the larger companies may have more kind of access, walled garden, behind the firewall implementations and so on. It may be slightly easier for them to do it. So we can see that there's going to be an interesting sort of shakeout. I mean, if it's a shakeout of the next few years where, the incumbents can kind of leverage their privileged access if they're good enough, or it may be that the fast moving startups get in there and eat their lunch. On the other hand, there'll be a big challenge for clients in, which of those two extremes that they go to. Do they want to try something really new and experiment and take on the potential pain there might be of doing that? I think it's going to be a really interesting journey.
It's going to be a fascinating time, reminiscent of the dot-com boom, of course, in the early 2000s, but different.
We now have much bigger companies in the space. In those days, and I think it was Danny's, she showed a graph, and it was going back to kind of like 2003. Along that, there were 10 or 100 companies in e-learning, or, and only one of those. Yeah. And now it's kind of whoosh.
590
and they're all
million.
Big companies,
Yeah.
There are a lot of big companies.
There are a lot of big companies.
Yeah.
And I think generally with the internet boom, which wasn't really internet, but the World Wide Web boom of the early 2000s, the entire ecosystem was different. But you did have this proliferation, for example, of internet service providers. So there was anybody could set themselves up as an ISP somewhere between 1998 and 2002, and there were people running ISPs out of their back room.
Yeah. And
of course, very rapidly they got bought out of business, or they got consolidated, or whatever. And now you basically, if you're not a major telco, you're not an ISP. I don't think there were any major ISPs that grew from nothing to become dominant players. So the existing telecoms companies were able to then add internet provision as one of the things they were offering people. So if you take that analogy, are we going to see large e-learning, for want of a better word, providers absorbing or stealing the lunch of the startups and using their market position to dominate the field? Or is it going to be more like, I don't know, a Cambrian explosion of 540 million years ago, when suddenly there was this explosion of life forms, and then they consolidated. You couldn't have all these life forms; that certain ones won out. So is it more like there's a level playing field?
I'm not sure of that, because if you're talking about ISPs, talking about infrastructure, and the infrastructure with AI isn't that kind of big companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, not quite so big, and Grok and Meta. That is kind of in place, that short grid of AI, if you like.
Sure. So one thing that's very different, I think, now is the funding situation. Yeah. So much easier for for companies to become large by getting big bets of big amounts of money, so they become big very quickly. But of course, what may still happen is that those companies like OpenAI may end up being so hugely unprofitable that in the end they have to be absorbed by Microsoft, for example. It's a possibility, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I was thinking more in the e-learning space itself. So if you think about the major players in
go down a tier.
Yeah, exactly. Major players in the learning space, are those companies going to remain dominant, or will other companies start small and grow to be as big or bigger. You take content, for example. We know it's been hugely altered by AI. If you're a content producer or you're an aggregator, what is your proposition now? I'm not sure I know what the answer is. I think each of them has a good solution to it. And then what's going to happen over the next year? I don't think any new content producing companies are going to pop up out of nowhere producing beautiful e-learning videos, for example, using standard techniques. But there will be an explosion of them producing video using synthetic video with AI, right?
Like Synthesia and
Colossian, HeyGen, all these companies. What then happens? Do those companies get absorbed by the companies? Do they consolidate? I don't know. It can't be like it is right now. But particularly the companies which are reliant on content as being their main USP are absolutely rightly looking for something to distinguish themselves with, because content is no longer a differentiator.
Yeah. Do you want to make any predictions about next year? It's been quite interesting to look back on where we were this event last year.
Yeah.
I was in this room, same room.
Was I here as well?
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And you were, I think you were in here, yeah?
Yeah, I think so.
As well. What are we, I might not be here next year, but what are we going to be, what are we liable to be saying then? Do you think there's any signs of the important things that are going to get thought out within that space? Obviously, the next 5 years is kind of where it's going to
We can't even look out 5 years in the future. I would not want to look even 3 years in the future. Yeah. I think the maximum time frame you look at with any sense of credibility is 2 years. But next year, what are we going to be looking at? I think we're going to be looking, because if you look at what the work that Mark Zhao-Saunders has done, published in HBR, about how people are actually using AI, there's this collection of things. I think that we're going to be looking at, from the AI shock of last year, to the sense that there are things we can do for good and ill with AI this year. We're going to be looking at very specific implementations and uses next year. And amongst those will be AI for coaching, AI for personalization, AI for personal productivity, and bundled or alongside all those is a sort of AI as a chum, AI as a sort of sounding board, as a partner. Yeah, exactly, thought partner, that sort of thing, which doesn't fit into any of those boxes. And I think we'll see good examples of all of those being brought out and explored next year in a way that Trish Hall and Josh Cavalier this year were looking at agents, just the beginning of agents. Yeah. I think we'll see a whole slew of these things next year.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then it's very difficult to look ahead, because if I look back on the progress just over a year, it's been quite significant.
Yeah, it's been insane.
Yeah. I mean, I was kind of a bit scoffing about agentic a year ago. And now I find that ChatGPT can not only write the questions, but draft it as a Word document and give it to me as downloadable. On the other hand, in the context that we've just had a 20-minute interview, and I've completely ignored the questions that I got it to generate for me, because half of them were rubbish. And I got very badly caught out of the interview earlier on. But if I look at the things I ask it to do nowadays, it's just absurd. Like everything from kind of researching a French philosopher to fixing a tap.
I would love it if you could coordinate those two and have Jean-Jacques Rousseau come round to sort your U-bend. That would be magnificent.
Yeah, you'd never get him shut up.
Oh, Monsieur Helmer, what do you think about about nature and nurture?
Would you like a tap or a simulation? The simulation. I should say this because it's a terrible insult to your team member, Sebastian.
Yes.
Who's, a great stalwart.
He's a stalwart, and he has, when he launches into his French, it is magnificent to listen to. Yeah. He's got not only a great voice, but also just speaks very fluently. So in terms of predictions, so I'd never make predictions, but I will say that broadly speaking, we are looking at specific implementations of AI, but there's something else we're going to be looking at next year, which is, so what? What are the implications of this for good and ill? And there's been real consensus this year, as I say, that AI means we've got to change the game. I think next year we'll be looking at how has the game changed? What is it that's new this year? And part of that will be, look, people haven't got jobs, that had jobs. What do you do next? Part of it will be, look at all these new things that we can do with AI as a result of what we've learned over the past 12 months. And that disparity between exciting growth and sometimes personally devastating lack of employment is really going to make people, I hope, think about the implications of it and use it more wisely. There may also be, I don't know, other implications around the wider world, whether it's sustainability, energy use, political impact, equity, I don't know.
It's called realignment. Sorry, I was going to say that. And, there's something that seems to be like a lot of people we're not talking about, but are beginning to surface in conversations you have around the edges, such as talking to an accessibility expert today. My client is no longer able to do American Sign Language on these particular products because the budgets for it have all been cut and so on. There'll be a lot of second-order effects like that all over the shop, and it may be that people next year would be wanting to talk about, okay, how do we deal with that? Because the world is shifting very much.
That's a really good point, yeah.
Yeah, there are so many different conversations. Last one was with a kind of a guy who deals in Global South learning programs to help people skill up, to deal with, and now he's doing that to deal with the kind of funding gaps, which in overseas aid are enormous, with, kind of the USA being cancelled and UK government cutting back and all the rest of it, and a complete kind of change of how you go about looking at helping the Global South. Those are big changes, and they are affecting our world. So I think you may see more of that next year.
I never make predictions for exactly this reason, and it's just impossible to say exactly what's going to happen. But I'll definitely come to you next year when I'm putting the program together, John. Yeah.
Oh, how kind. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll get on that big stage.
But maybe. I've got a little anecdote about how ChatGPT has changed for my personal use over 3 years. So when it very first came out, I started using it to try to draft the text. I thought, this is fabulous. Writing the text for the program, describing all the sessions is really difficult. I gave it something like 10 years, 15 years of material to feed, asked it to look at my notes and create descriptions, and they just weren't good enough. I could use 20% of it maybe. It was really annoying.
Yeah.
Because it was one of those things that looked good from a distance. You got close, it was useless.
Yeah.
The next year, actually, about 40 to 50% usable. This year, most of the text in the program has been 80% written by ChatGPT with modifications by me.
Yeah.
And that's a huge change. And it means that the people who were writing that in the past aren't writing it now. So that job of being skilled at knowing a domain and being able to write things has gone now. Because next year, the use of ChatGPT is only going to be even more accurate for this.
Yeah. And I'd say there is one podcast I did this year, and I'm not going to say which one it was, where it was in a knowledge area that I wasn't very up to speed on. I let ChatGPT kind of take the weight, and it wrote far more intelligent questions than I could have done. And it was a very popular episode. It makes you think. Anyway, on that bombshell, I'm going to make one prediction, which is that we're kind of both headed to a drink at the bar and maybe a train back to our loved ones.
Well, we are, but I'm also going to my debrief dinner with Sheena Wyatt.
All right.
Every year we go through what's happened, try and get it pinned down. Then I'm travelling across London in my goalkeeping gear with my suitcases to go to play in goal for my five-a-side team. Kick-off is at 9:15 this evening.
Right.
It's the perfect end to give myself some exercise after 2 days of being inside.
Right. Well, for yet another year, the conference has been in that very safe pair of hands. Thanks very much, Don.
Thank you very much, John.
Cheers. Chris.
That's all on the Learning Hack podcast for this time. The Learning Hack is completely independent and transparently funded by sponsorship. If you want to help others find us, please like, follow, rate, review and subscribe on your podcast platform of choice or on YouTube.
The Learning Hack is among the top 5% of shows most listened to globally, according to Listen Notes. And if you think your organisation could benefit from sponsoring the Learning Hack, or from using our knowledge and resources to start your own learning podcasts, you can contact me on john@learninghackpodcasts.com. Until next time.
Stay curious, learning people.
Now I finally